Chapter 28:13. Side mission. I think this is your weakness, so I made this punishment permanent. In the future, all your mission punishments will be disfigurement. Wei bye, side mission, but I know I made you unhappy. I will definitely change the next side mission in advance. Now that the mission in this plane has been locked, it can't be changed. When Bai Weiwei heard this, she felt a little better. The side mission was so gentle. She really fell in love with it. Disfigurement of the soul was too scary. She felt like she was about to wake up from a dream. If she was disfigured, wouldn't this world lose her beautiful face? This loss was too great. She muttered this sentence to herself. Side mission, the system patted its shoulder comfortingly. My host is like this. You have to get used to it. Side mission rubbed its chin. Who could get used to such a weird host? But then it thought about how it got the account number 004. It didn't seem like it couldn't be tolerated. Lu Xinglan went out to handle official business. There was news from the imperial family. It said that Yuan Xian was building a moon-admiring court in the South Garden again and wanted to use military funds. He went to visit the ministers of the Ministry of Revenue one by one today. Then he went to the Prime Minister's house to drink tea. Yuan Xian's desk would probably be full of impeachment reports tomorrow. Using military funds. Wasn't this weakening his power? Yuan Xian's methods were vicious and didn't care about the Southern Empire. This crazy idea even thought that it was better for the Northern Empire to attack the Southern Empire than for the Lu family to cover the sky. This twisted and crazy mentality. It was simply a lunatic. Lu Xinglan was very calm. He was very disappointed in the imperial family. If it wasn't for the Lu family guarding the country for generations and him inheriting this responsibility, and if the Southern Empire was in a precarious situation, he would have left everything behind and retired to the countryside. Otherwise, who would want this heavy job? He wouldn't starve to death from farming. And he had a virtuous wife at home. Cough, cough, the life of a deity was just like that. Lu Xinglan had never been so anxious to return home. He rode his horse through the main street. There was a long road ahead, and at the end of the road was the Lu residence. The horse's hooves stepped on the long gravel road. Da-da-da. Xan Wu also followed behind him, but he ran too fast, so he was already quite far away. On both sides of the long road were high walls. In the summer, the phoenix flowers bloomed, and the entire tree was red. Lu Xinglan looked up at the flowers and thought that Weiwei Bai always liked beautiful flowers. Although those flowers had been smashed by her and smeared on her face. But this could also be considered as liking flowers. He stretched out his hand and flicked a finger towards the tree. A few red phoenix flowers fell into his arms. A trace of a smile appeared on the man's beautiful face. Under his eyelashes, a pair of black eyes were filled with gentleness. He was just about to pull on the reins and continue forward. Suddenly, he heard the sound of killing intent. This kind of almost inaudible shattering sound was almost drowned out by the clamor of cicadas in summer. However, Lu Xinglan had lived on the battlefield since she was young. The sharpness of the aura of death and the sound of weapons was carved into his bones. The shattering sound was the sound of an arrow being loaded onto a bow. After the string moved, the long arrow suddenly arrived. The light of the arrowhead was like the scythe of the grim reaper in the scorching sun. Ruthlessly and accurately, it shot towards Lu Xinglan's chest. Lu Xinglan's expression turned cold. She leaned to the side and pulled on the reins in her hand, dodging the arrow. But soon, even more arrows rained down on them like a torrential rain. Lu Xinglan knew that the other party came prepared. //. Comma. Chapter 28:14. They were waiting to ambush him. He heard Axian Wu rushing over to help him. Lu Xinglan pulled out the long sword beside the horse and knocked down all the arrows. But one arrow was still very fast and pierced into his shoulder. Half of the arrow went into his flesh and blood started to flow out. Lu Xinglan looked at it expressionlessly. This kind of small wound was nothing to him. He did not pull out the arrow. Because if he did, more blood would flow out. Axian Wu rode his horse and quickly arrived in front of Lu Xinglan. He took out his longbow expressionlessly. Lu Xinglan said coldly, 3 on the east wall, 2 on the south corner, more than 10 people in a row to the north. Lu Xinglan had already memorized the direction of the arrow that was fired. Axian Wu nodded and put 3 arrows on his bow, shooting towards the east. There were exactly 3 screams. Although the others were panicking, they still put arrows on their bows calmly. But it was too late. The swords were all knocked down by Lu Xinglan. Axian Wu was like a cruel grim reaper. Every time he attacked, no one could escape the punishment of death. One defended while the other attacked. He killed all the assassins who blocked his way. Wei Wei Bai heard the system say, "Someone is killing the male lead outside the door." Wei Wei Bai was pulling petals to make rouge. She asked, "Who sent them?" The system said, "Who else could it be? That Emperor cannon fodder. He can't wait to kill the male lead, but since he's so eager to kill him, this cannon fodder probably doesn't have much time left." Wei Wei Bai smiled, "That's great. Lu Xinglan is being murdered, so if he's hot-blooded, he'll be able to complete the mission." The system nodded in agreement and took a big bite of the super luxurious golden diamond drumstick. Lu Xinglan took care of those people. He walked through the door. He reeked of blood and held a sword in his hand. His long hair was messy behind him. His white robe was mostly red with blood spots. He looked like a red plum blossom, but also like a demon. Lu Xinglan wiped his face expressionlessly. There was blood on his face too. He looked at it indifferently and did not care. Axian Wu went to call the doctor. As he habitually walked out of the house, he suddenly thought of something and his expression froze. He had to treat the wound first and then take a bath. Otherwise, it would scare the people in the house. With that in mind, Lu Xinglan turned to leave. However, he heard a soft voice call out from behind him. "Husband." Lu Xinglan's footsteps froze. She didn't come back to her senses. She only responded with a faint hum. Then he said, "I have something to do. I'll take my leave first." After saying that, he coldly raised his foot and was about to step forward. But the corner of his clothes was tugged. Lu Xinglan's entire body froze. She loosened her grip on the corner of his shirt and gently hooked her fingers around his again. "Husband, what's wrong?" she asked worriedly. Lu Xinglan pursed her lips and lowered her eyelashes to hide the hesitation in her eyes. Then he turned around and revealed the bloodstain on his shoulder. There was no way to hide it unless he pushed her away and ran away. But when he wanted to push her, he couldn't. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were a little sluggish for a moment, and then there was a little panic. This panic was suppressed by her. She calmed down and said, "Let's go in." "Has the doctor called?" Lu Xinglan thought that she would be scared to tears, but he only saw her worried expression. He heaved a sigh of relief. Yes, he did. She immediately took his hand and walked into the house. "How deep is the wound on your shoulder? How deep is the arrowhead?" To stop the wound, Lu Xinglan didn't pull out the arrowhead. It looked bloody and frightening. But Wei Wei Bai was unusually calm. She asked him to sit down, brought hot water, and cut open his clothes to reveal the wound. Then she began to use the hot water to wipe the blood around him. The doctor soon arrived. He was half lying down, and the doctor began to remove the arrowhead. Lu Xinglan was used to this kind of scene. But he stared sideways at the girl squatting by the bed. The girl's eyes were filled with deep worry. Her fingers gripped his fingertips tightly. She forced herself to be calm, but her trembling fingers betrayed her. She was still afraid. But she didn't want to burden him and chose to force herself to be calm. The moment the doctor removed the arrowhead, Lu Xinglan's face turned pale, and his muscles immediately tightened. Wei Wei Bai cried out in alarm. Finally, she couldn't hold it in anymore. She helplessly held his palm with both hands. It was as if this action could make him feel better. The doctor bandaged the wound. Lu Xinglan regained his spirit. His pale face was full of sweat, but he slightly turned his eyes. His gaze was deep and gentle. "I'm fine." Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips. Her lips had lost their color. She said, "I'm not fine." Lu Xinglan was puzzled. He saw her lower her head and rest her eyes on his palm. Tears fell. "You really worried me, Lu Xinglan." The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 28:15. Her soft face leaned against his palm, and her fluttering eyelashes were like a small fan, scraping his palm. Cold tears seeped into the gaps between his fingers. Lu Xinglan's pale and calm face showed a trace of uneasiness. His voice was low and contained an imperceptible helplessness. "Don't cry. I'm fine. It's just a small wound. I'm used to it." Lu Xinglan thought that if he said that, she would not worry. However, he saw the girl's tears fall even more fiercely. She did not look up. Her lips were tightly pursed, and her delicate brows were furrowed because of sadness. "Why are you?" Her voice was muffled with sobs. "So heartbreaking." Lu Xinglan looked at her blankly, as if he did not understand. "Heartbroken." He suddenly moved his tear-filled fingers. The girl looked up in shock. Her eyes were red, and so was her nose. She was unusually cute and pitiful. She bit her lip. Traces of tears were all over her face. Lu Xinglan's fingers trembled. He touched her tears, but he thought of something and quickly stopped. He wiped his fingers on his robe to make sure that they were dry. He immediately covered her face with his fingers and wiped her tears. "Don't cry. Next time, I'll take you to the lake. Don't you like those flowers?" At this point, Lu Xinglan took out a phoenix flower from his arms. The flower was incomplete. However, it was still fresh and beautiful. "Look, is this flower beautiful?" After saying that, Lu Xinglan realized that the flower was incomplete. Lu Xinglan frowned and immediately suppressed his tone, trying to be calm. "Yes, it's fine. I'll bring you more next time." Then, he wanted to take the flower back as if nothing had happened. However, a pair of soft hands held his hand. Then, she smiled with tears in her eyes and said, "It's beautiful." Lu Xinglan stared at her silently. His deep eyes were slowly covered by an extremely gentle emotion. His fingers gently approached her hair, and then he pinned the flower to her ear. The bright color of the flower made the girl's delicate and fair face look a little rosy. Lu Xinglan's voice was hoarse. Very beautiful. She was the most beautiful person he had ever met in his life. But that was in the past or in the future. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 75. Inside the palace. All the eunuchs and palace maids were trembling with fear, not daring to breathe loudly. Yuan Xian smashed a vase and kicked away a young eunuch. "You still have the face to tell me about your failure. Capture all the losers and execute them." The great eunuch trembled as he knelt on the ground. He did not dare to raise his head to say, "Your Majesty, they are all dead." Not a single one was left. They were all killed by Lu Xinglan. Yuan Xian turned around. The pale and treacherous youth with long hair draped over his shoulders said fiercely, "Then take back the corpse and grind the bones to dust." After he finished speaking, his thin red lips curled up coldly. "I've truly underestimated Lu Xinglan. I thought that I would definitely kill her when she was unprepared." He thought he could wait. However, she didn't know that the last time she saw him in the lotus field, he had a stomach full of anger. The more he thought about it, the more he felt threatened. The more he thought about it, the more resentment he felt. This country belonged to his family, not Lu Xinglan. What right did he have to be so arrogant? Everyone in the southern nation was talking about that damned Lu Xinglan. Moreover, he wanted to build a moon-admiring court. All he did was embezzle some military funds. Then those damned pedantic officials would come and stop him. He was the master of this country. He was the emperor. Chapter 28:16. Who dared to make decisions for him? He could do whatever he wanted. The whole world belonged to him. Why should he listen to them? He clearly knew that he should continue to endure. After all, Lu Xinglan's power was too great. In addition, he had the will of the people. If he made a move, Lu Xinglan would be vigilant and have some rebellious thoughts. His current power was not enough to wrestle with him. The Prime Minister hurried over and saw the mess on the ground, as well as the ashen-faced palace maids and eunuchs. He immediately knelt down and saluted, "Your subject salutes your Majesty." "Long live your Majesty." Yuan Xian threw a paperweight at his feet. "What, are you here to persuade me? Can't even afford to build a moon-admiring court." The Prime Minister immediately said respectfully, "Your Majesty, you have to bear with the humiliation. That thief Lu Xinglan may have evil intentions. First, you have to coax him, then find an opportunity to ruin his reputation. Finally, you have to kill him." Yuan Xian glared at him and said, "How can you ruin his reputation? Didn't you give your daughter to him? In the end, you were kicked out by him. This is simply a disgrace." When the Prime Minister thought of his daughter being kicked out of the temple by Lu Xinglan, he gnashed his teeth in hatred. Recently, there were rumors that he likes women, and he especially favors one concubine. He even put his mother under house arrest for this concubine. If this news spreads, he will definitely be reviled by the public. After all, filial piety was the highest. Whoever was unfilial would be pointed at the spine and scolded. Yuan Xian paced back and forth in frustration, especially when he heard about the concubine. He gnashed his teeth in hatred. Too slow. "I don't want to wait." The Prime Minister said, "Your Majesty has waited for so many years. Why can't you wait a little longer?" Although Yuan Xian was suspicious and irritable, he still had patience. Why did he go crazy after returning from the lake trip? Yuan Xian glared at him fiercely. "Even you dare to control me?" The Prime Minister immediately bowed. "Your subject does not dare. Your subject is guilty." A trace of murderous intent appeared in Yuan Xian's eyes, but he also knew that the Prime Minister was the most powerful person on his side. Killing him would do him no good. Yuan Xian suddenly said, "It's my birthday in 3 days. I'm going to hold a grand birthday banquet and have Lu Xinglan bring her family to attend. Just treat it as my compromise. When the time comes, I'll just send my regards to her." This would ease Lu Xinglan's heart. He couldn't suppress the killing intent in his heart, which was why he made such an impulsive decision. He regretted it afterwards. After all, if they couldn't kill Lu Xinglan, it would be over if Lu Xinglan decided to rebel. When the Prime Minister heard this, he knew that Yuan Xian had calmed down. He immediately smiled and said, "Your Majesty is wise." Yuan Xian raised his eyebrows coldly. Then, they began to spread rumors that he was a pervert and unfilial son to his mother. Bit by bit, they tainted his perfect reputation. The Prime Minister replied, "Yes, Your Majesty." Yuan Xian said coldly, "Leave." The Prime Minister withdrew. Yuan Xian stood in place. After a long time, he flung his sleeves and walked inside. He sat in front of the table and stared at the memorials that prevented him from building the moon viewing pavilion. He snorted coldly. Then, without knowing why, his eyes lightly fell on a bookshelf next to him. There was a small earthenware pot of wine. He didn't even open the seal. It was quiet. Yuan Xian stared for a long time. Suddenly, his face flushed red and he looked away in panic. Xan Wu gave Lu Xinglan a handwritten order from the palace. Lu Xinglan casually glanced at it and threw it aside. It was Yuan Xian's birthday banquet in 3 days. The order asked him to bring his family. He clearly knew that Mother Lu was under house arrest by him, but he deliberately made this move. Chapter 28:17. He picked up the pen and was about to continue drawing the map. However, he heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching from afar. His fingers froze and he was about to throw the pen away. But he heard Wei Wei Bai's voice. "Young master." Lu Xinglan put down the pen and turned around with a calm face. "Yes, I'm back." Wei Wei Bai was holding a plate with bandages and medicine on it. She glanced at the ink on the table and the ink pen that was casually thrown aside. And the half-drawn map. The girl frowned and sighed unhappily. "Why are you working again? Didn't I tell you to rest when you're injured?" Lu Xinglan put his fist to his mouth as if nothing had happened and coughed to cover it up. "No, I'm just tidying up. I didn't use the pen to draw." Wei Wei Bai looked at him helplessly for a while. She saw that he was looking around guiltily. Then she walked to him and put down the plate. Then she rolled up his sleeves and said gently, "Take off your clothes." Lu Xinglan's back was facing her. When he heard this, he lowered his eyelashes and blushed. He took off half of his clothes and straightened his back, not showing a trace of helplessness. The girl behind him put her hand gently on his shoulder and began to remove the bandages. There was a faint fragrance with the smell of flowers. She lowered her head and touched the area around his wound with her soft fingers. The coolness of the medicine slowly covered it. Under the light, the two of them were quietly intertwined. After Wei Wei Bai applied the medicine, she began to bandage him. The slope of the man's shoulder was perfect and beautiful. When she touched it with her fingers, she could see that the skin under his shoulder had many light white marks of healing. Wei Wei Bai's fingers paused and touched a deeper mark. Lu Xinglan's shoulder stiffened. He felt that the slight coolness of the girl's fingertips seemed to have some kind of indescribable magic. A little itch spread from her fingers. He lowered his eyes and his breathing became heavy. And his fingers couldn't help but move. He had a feeling that he wanted to hold her fingers. Without waiting for his hand to reach out. He heard Wei Wei Bai say softly, "Were these wounds all made at the border?" Lu Xinglan's finger froze and she quickly retracted it. She said calmly, "Yeah, it's not a big deal. It's just a small injury." He was afraid that she would cry again. He immediately explained, "They're really not fatal. I've been through special training since I was young, so I can avoid all fatal attacks as much as possible." Although that was what he said. However, if they were to really enter the battlefield, they would only have a slight chance of survival compared to others. How many powerful people had died on the battlefield due to bad luck? Lu Xinglan felt that her luck was pretty good. At the very least, he had never died before. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said, "Who wants to kill you?" Lu Xinglan's originally gentle expression froze for a moment. Then, she said in an indifferent tone, "Maybe he's overshadowed his master." He knew who wanted to kill him. However, he didn't expect the other party to be so anxious. So stupid. There were still many problems in the southern nation. Kill Lu Xinglan. The north immediately swept over. Who could stop him? Lu Xinglan couldn't think of anyone who could stop him. If she could find him, even Yuan Xian himself could. He would have left long ago. Why would he still be here? In the past, he didn't have any other goals. He just lived for the Lu family. Now, he was a little weak. Chapter 28:18. That small thought had shaken him so much. He already had someone he cared about. He was no longer a wandering soul who lived for the Nan Kingdom without a goal. So if there was really no other way, he would take her away. He would try his best and not force it. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be stunned for a long time before she woke up from this question. Yes, Lu Xinglan had already turned around. He stretched out a finger and gently pressed against her lips. Shoo, don't say it. After all, he was the emperor. How could he talk about her behind her back so easily? Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes fluttered. Her lips moved slightly and brushed against the man's finger. His face turned red and he immediately retracted his finger. Then, he turned around as if nothing had happened and did not say anything else. Wei Wei Bai did not say anything. After the bandage was done, Wei Wei Bai pinched his clothes with her fingers. Suddenly, she sighed softly. My heart aches for you. Lu Xinglan, this is too dangerous. Haven't you thought about how to make yourself safer? For example, kicking away that bastard on top. Sitting on the golden chair. How satisfying. Lu Xinglan was silent for a while before saying slowly, I thought about it. I wanted to hand over the military power and leave this place. Wei Wei Bai, so unambitious. She immediately tried to persuade him. Without the military power, wouldn't you be in more danger? It would be easier to kill you. Lu Xinglan shook his head gently and revealed a smile. I have a backup plan. Once I leave, no one will be able to find me. He was still confident about this. Wei Wei Bai, damn it, was this 1,000-year-old turtle? He was already being murdered, but he could still tolerate it. She racked her brains and said, don't you have a trace of resentment? Lu Xinglan was silent for a while. His expression was more solemn and gloomy. He said, I do have some resentment, and I have also thought of some rebellious thoughts. But the Lu family has been loyal for generations. This heavy reputation was built by many heroic souls. I don't want to bear the reputation of a traitor. Otherwise, I would be letting the Lu family's plaque down. If the Nan Kingdom could be maintained like this. Even if he was resentful, he could persevere. If the Southern Empire was ruined by the imperial family to the point that there was no chance of survival. At that time, he might even think of rebelling. Anyway, the country was going to be destroyed, so he didn't care about his reputation. But now, if the country were to perish, in that case, he might not choose to seize power and betray, but to leave. Because, the girl by his side couldn't withstand the bloodshed that would ensue when he seized power. If he took her away, she would be able to live a peaceful life. Lu Xinglan's eyes were dark and determined. He pursed his lips and pondered for a while. Then, he said in a hoarse voice, in the future, even if we reach the end of the road, I will not abandon you. I will take you with me and leave this place. This was the most passionate thing he could say. Even if it was reserved, it was unusually deep. Wei Wei Bai, if Yuan Xian was a brat, Lu Xinglan was a son of a bitch. How could he be so tolerant? Was he still a man? That didn't seem to be the case. Last time, when she laid down and asked him to do it, he didn't do it. Now that he had almost been killed, he was still so patient. Since he was forced into a corner, he might as well just leave. Wei Wei Bai only wanted to carve the word bitch on his face. After Lu Xinglan finished making this promise, he felt that it was a little too rash. He looked sideways slightly, but he didn't dare to really turn his head. He could only pretend to be calm and say, "It's already late. Don't be too tired." The girl behind him was silent for a long time. Just when Lu Xinglan felt that the atmosphere was a little wrong. Suddenly, there was a gentle touch on the light-colored mark on his back. Her soft lips kissed gently. The girl's faint breath blew on the healed wound mark. Lu Xinglan was stunned. But he heard her whisper softly behind him, "Rest, young master." Her words were a little ambiguous and gentle. /save button, comma. Chapter 28:19. Her voice became shy again. "I'll take off your clothes." Lu Xinglan's face was stiff and calm. He was so calm that he looked like a statue and didn't dare to move. Wei Wei Bai's lips left his back and slowly took off his outer robe. The girl's fingers were always cold. The man sat with his eyelashes like fans. His thin lips were slightly pursed and he didn't move. The outer robe was taken off, revealing a thin white shirt underneath. The outline of the man's back was unusually good-looking. Under the thin white shirt, the protrusion of his shoulder blades could be faintly seen. His muscles were unusually tense. It seemed to be because of her proximity. Wei Wei Bai bent down slightly. He was tall. Even if he was sitting, she could touch his neck by lowering her head slightly. There was a cool medicinal scent on his body. There was also a slight smell of blood. But more than that, there was a faint sandalwood scent on this man that didn't dissipate. It was the incense that he lit to calm his nerves over the years. And after she came, he hadn't lit this kind of incense for a while. Most of the time, he used a fainter but sweet flower bud fragrance. It was more to a girl's taste. When Lu Xinglan breathed, he didn't smell his own scent at all. It was hers. It was soft and light, but it smelled like a girl's scent. It made him want to hold his breath, but he couldn't bear to. After Wei Wei Bai took off his outer robe, she said softly, "Quickly rest." Lu Xinglan sat stiffly for a while before nodding and getting up. Then he turned around and was about to step over to the bed. Suddenly, he bumped into a soft and petite body. The girl wasn't tall. Her head bumped directly into his shoulder. Wei Wei Bai was also shocked, but she didn't avoid it. Instead, her eyelashes drooped, and there was a hint of redness on her face. She looked sweet and delicate. He stood still and let her lean on him. He stretched out his hand and couldn't bear to push her away. Instead, he gently placed it on her thin shoulder. He said in a low and hoarse voice, "Where did you bump into?" Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and remained silent. Then, she nervously shook her head. The two of them stood there quietly like two dumbstruck geese. With great difficulty, Wei Wei Bai finally took a deep breath and left his embrace. Then she turned and walked to the bed to tidy up the quilt. Lu Xinglan stood there for a while and stared at her bent back, as well as her thin waist. Then he walked over. Just as he was about to reach out to help. Without waiting for him to bend over, he suddenly saw the side of the girl's burning face. Her delicate red face seemed to be dyed with her lipstick. He also pursed his lips and felt the tips of his ears turn red. Under the dim yellow light, there was an indescribable tension in the atmosphere. This kind of tension was different from that of life and death on the battlefield. However, compared to the moment between life and death, his heart was beating faster. Lu Xinglan took a deep breath and barely managed to suppress her surging emotions. She couldn't bear to scare her and was about to tell her to rest. However, he heard the girl's figure, which was incomparably weak, hesitant and shy. "Young master, are you feeling better?" Lu Xinglan was taken aback. But he saw Bai Weiwei raise her eyes. Her white face was flushed, and there was a hint of a charming smile. "That's right. Can you touch me now?" Lu Xinglan only felt his heart beating extremely fast. His eyebrows also jumped, and his fingers couldn't help but clench tightly. His mind went blank for a moment. Only her words kept echoing in his mind. "Can you touch me now?" "Can?" Lu Xinglan lowered his eyes and didn't say anything, but his hand gently touched her waist. The girl was a little ticklish and flinched. She seemed to want to dodge, but she forced herself not to move. Slash. Chapter 28:20. Her eyes were misty, and there was a pure expression on her delicate and beautiful face, but it was so charming that it could bewitch people. Lu Xinglan's fingers tightened, and he was about to pull her into his arms. But the smile on the girl's face disappeared. Then, she calmly took a few steps back and bowed to him politely. "Young master, you should rest first." Only then did she reveal a small smile, and casually touched the flowers on her hair. The girl was beautiful. "You've just recovered and need a transition period. I won't disturb you, we'll sleep in separate beds today." Lu Xinglan looked at her blankly. He seemed to be unable to react. The girl didn't care about him anymore, but turned around and walked out with her skirt fluttering. The system was munching on the platinum sunflower seeds. "What's wrong?" "Weiwei Bai, isn't he very tolerant?" "Just let him be. His head is about to be chopped off, and this son of a bitch still wants to play the rural recluse. Look at him, he might as well just become a eunuch, wouldn't that be more perfect?" 3 months to change Lu Xinglan's mind and change the dynasty. He thought it wouldn't be difficult. In the end, he met a ninja turtle. He tolerated. Anyway, he wasn't a man. She couldn't tease him to death. Weiwei Bai stepped out of the door with one foot, and coldly snorted. The system heard this, and then it was blocked. Oh, did the host flirt too much? After all, she wasn't flirting with a real eunuch. The system, who was used to being blocked, slowly picked up the #1 super expensive coffee in the universe, and elegantly took a sip. Ah, these days were really beautiful. The side mission sucker, was really good. It was so kind that it could move heaven and earth. It used the millions of life points in its bank account in exchange for 3 years of free luxury food. When the system thought of its debt, it immediately blocked the account and escaped. The side mission signed, and the name of the account was transferred to itself. In the past, it didn't believe in good people. After meeting the host, there were no good people in this world. Now it believed. The side mission great philanthropist. It had fallen in love with it. Ha 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 ha, Weiwei Bai was also smiling, but before her other foot could step out of the door, she had already stepped out of the door. The man behind her had already grabbed her waist with one hand and closed the door with the other. Weiwei Bai was shocked. She quickly turned around, only to see the man in front of her take a few steps forward and force her against the door. However, Lu Xinglan pressed closer. She touched her waist with one hand and touched the flower in her hair with the other. He lowered his head and his breath was a little hot. Sleeping in separate beds. Weiwei Bai raised her head and seemed to be a little nervous as she laughed, isn't it because I'm afraid that my husband has just recovered from his illness and can't exercise vigorously? And your wound. She didn't even finish her words. The man in front of her had already lowered his head and blocked her words. He had thought of this countless times when he looked at her from the side at night. He had been holding it in all this while. He didn't dare to go overboard with her. After all, she was still young. Her eyes were so charming, but they were so pure that no one dared to profane her. Lu Xinglan had always used this reason to restrain herself. But he couldn't hold it in anymore. Wei Wei Bai reached out to push him away, but he didn't make things difficult for her. Instead, he panted and rested his head on her thin shoulder. His voice was low and hoarse. Wei Wei, can I? This weak plea was wrapped in a shaky sense of reason. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and finally said with difficulty, no. Lu Xinglan's fingers gently pressed against her lips, and his lips landed on her pink and white neck. Slash. Chapter 28-21. Small and fragmented. A bit rusty. But with irresistible passion. Wei Wei Bai, why can't you bear it? When you shouldn't bear it, shouldn't you bear it boldly? The night slowly deepened. No one paid attention to the candlelight and it gradually extinguished. The candlelight made a crackling sound and it was filled with darkness. Only the moonlight shone through the window, illuminating the messy clothes on the ground. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 80. The emperor's birthday banquet was extremely grand. On the road outside the palace, bright lights spread all along the way. All kinds of people were invited to perform, and lively singing troops made the usually cold and quiet palace gate very noisy. Yuan Xian stood on the palace wall and watched unhappily. The ministers who came to attend all got off the carriage outside the palace. He finally saw the familiar sound of horse hooves. It was Lu Xinglan's. He never rode in a carriage. But this time, the sound of horse hooves was a bit slow. He looked carefully and saw Lu Xinglan riding a horse, slowly walking. And beside him was a carriage. The curtain on the small window of the carriage was half open. It was too far to see clearly. But he saw that Lu Xinglan seemed to have heard the person in the carriage say something and couldn't help but laugh. Yuan Xian raised an eyebrow and coldly snorted. The head eunuch carefully reminded, it should be General Lu's concubine. Who didn't know that Lu Xinglan hated women? It was rare that he was enlightened for a woman. This kind of inconceivable thing spread all over the court. The people all heard about it. The reputation of that concubine also followed. They all said that she had to be beautiful to be able to move a man like Lu Xinglan. The head eunuch saw Yuan Xian's expression become even uglier. He tried to figure out the emperor's intention and immediately said with an ugly expression, but General Lu is too arrogant. His Majesty's birthday banquet, he actually let a mere servant come in. A concubine was a servant. Not to mention that the concubine was indeed a servant. But when this sentence came out, Yuan Xian immediately raised his foot in anger and kicked the old eunuch out. Who is a servant? You're rebelling. Jin didn't say anything. Is it your turn to talk about it? The old eunuch immediately kowtowed and begged for mercy, slapping himself repeatedly. Yuan Xian couldn't care less about him and immediately rushed down. The eunuch immediately followed, and everyone was at a loss. Just a moment ago, he had come to look at the city walls in high spirits, thinking that he was here to watch a circus. But after looking at the carriages of the ministers for a long time, when he saw Lu Xinglan's carriage, he immediately got angry and stopped looking. Could it be that His Majesty was angry again after seeing Lu Xinglan? The carriage entered the palace gates. Lu Xinglan had special privileges. Wei Wei Bai saw that everyone else was alighting in front of the carriage. He swaggered into the palace gates with the carriage in tow. He couldn't help but complain to the system, she's not rebelling, yet she wants all kinds of privileges. Is Lu Xinglan deliberately looking for trouble? This guy was swaggering around as if he didn't care about the royal family. However, he had no intention of overthrowing the royal family. How stupid would one have to be to do such a thing? The system said, because the male lead hates the royal family. To him, protecting the country is his goal, and the royal family is his stumbling block. He despises the royal family while protecting the southern kingdom is not conflicting. Wei Weibai said, which part is not conflicting? Isn't he afraid that the royal family will retaliate and kill him one day? The system said, if they don't kill him, the male lead's momentum will continue to grow. When he dies, the royal family will be ants under his feet, unable to do anything. Download the at https://m Sashu. Com. Chapter 28-22. Wei Weibai held her forehead and felt a headache coming on. She had forgotten about the halo of being the chosen one. It was just that no matter how hard she tried, she wouldn't die. She had secretly hinted a few times during this period of time. The result was that Lu Xinglan would never rebel. Because to him, it was easy to rebel, but unnecessary. So, he wouldn't rebel. Wei Weibai looked at the 3 months and thought that it was a long time. In fact, it was very short. It was so short that the day when she saw her soul disfigured and scared the system to death was coming. So during this period of time, she looked at the mirror whenever she had time. She was worried that if she was disfigured in the future, she wouldn't be able to look at it anymore. After getting off the carriage, Lu Xinglan took her to see the huge lake in the palace. It was full of koi fish. There were also beautiful red lotuses. The brightly lit palace was unusually lively. Lu Xinglan held her hand and slowly walked forward. When the banquet starts later, sit in the women's section and wake up after eating. I'll deal with it for a while and then take you to see the juggling. It was rare to see such a lively juggling. There were also opera troupes invited in advance from all over the country. This was impossible to see on a normal day. The cost was huge, and there had to be a reason to do so. The emperor's birthday was the best reason. Although Lu Xinglan didn't agree with such extravagance and waste. However, in recent years, the trade market he opened at the border had become lively. He could also earn a huge amount of money to maintain the daily operation of the Southern Army. As long as there was no war, it was a stalemate. He wasn't afraid that the royal family would use some reason to deduct the military funds given by the imperial court. So Lu Xinglan thought that it would be good to bring Wei Weibai to see it. It was rare to see such a lively scene. It would be difficult to see it next time. As a girl, she had always been in the residence and had never made a fuss about going out to play. His heart ached when he saw it. As for the royal family, he would leave after dealing with them. The failed assassination just now should have made Yuan Xian not dare to act rashly. He knew Yuan Xian too well, so this assassination was very unexpected. Because it wasn't like him. Although he was cruel, he was unusually patient and wasn't an idiot. There was no benefit in killing him at this time. Lu Xinglan was still trying to figure out the reason for killing him. However, when he was invited to the birthday party, he saw Yuan Xian admitting defeat. Lu Xinglan reminded Wei Weibai with concern. I will have the palace maids follow you. I won't let you get lost. Wei Weibai held the lotus-colored handkerchief and chuckled. Am I a child? Why are you so worried? This teasing was like a sweet fruit, sweet to the ears. Lu Xinglan stared at her blankly. Then, she looked away as if she had thought of something. Her body stiffened slightly. Then he held her hand and walked towards the palace banquet. He didn't say anything along the way. When the palace maids arrived, she would sit down and wait for the banquet to start. Lu Xinglan let go of her hand and watched as she turned to leave. He then called out in a low and hoarse voice, "Wei Wei." Wei Wei Bai turned around. She saw the man standing under the light. The delicate halo fell on his excessively handsome face, and there was a kind of sudden amazement like a fairy. He looked at her quietly. Then his thin lips curled slightly, revealing a gentle smile. "Nothing, I just wanted to see you." It was such a small distance, he could see her just by looking up. However, he still felt that they had to be separated for a meal and was not satisfied. Lu Xinglan never thought that he would be so wishy-washy one day. However, he saw the girl looking at him with bright eyes. She revealed a sweet smile and said, "Let's watch the show together later." Eating was secondary. The main reason was to watch the show and sideshow. Lu Xinglan's eyes were full of tenderness. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 85. This favorability was on steroids. Wei Wei Bai was not surprised and followed the palace maid forward. She looked at the side mission again. Progress, 0, Lu Xinglan, that bastard, it was annoying to see his favorability increase. As she walked, she suddenly felt that the road was too long. Wei Wei Bai glanced at the palace maid, but saw that the palace maid returned to her senses and respectfully handed the lantern in her hand to her. "Miss, it's in front. You can go there yourself." After saying this, the palace maid hurriedly left. Wei Wei Bai held the lantern and stood there speechlessly for a while. What was going on? Could it be that bastard Yuan Xian thought it through and directly killed Lu Xinglan at the birthday banquet by smashing the cup as a signal? This was good. It was best to make Lu Xinglan so angry that he rebelled. Just as she was about to let the system recognize the way, she saw a person's shadow in the corner in front of her. Wei Wei Bai tilted her head and said with a light smile, "Sorry, it's my first time in the palace and I'm not familiar with the roads. May I ask where the banquet is?" The figure in the corner froze. After a while, he lowered his voice and said, "Go back and walk a dozen steps. If you see a eunuch, let him take you there." The figure seemed to be hesitating whether to come out or not. In the end, he could only stand in the corner in fear. He felt that he was too impulsive. How could he let someone bring her here? Just as he was about to leave. Then, he saw a lantern appear in the corner, and the soft light shone down. The girl's soft and boneless fingers pressed on the wooden frame of the lantern and poked her head in to look at him. Her eyes were gentle, but there was a hint of bewitching charm. "It's you. Aren't you my husband's friend?" Yuan Xian, who was standing in the dark and illuminated by the lantern, stood there stiffly. Then, his face slowly turned red. /record. Chapter 28-23. The night was dark. The halo of the lantern dyed the darkness. Wei Wei Bai looked at him curiously with a calm expression. "Are you also here to attend Her Majesty's birthday banquet?" Yuan Xian moved his lips but didn't say anything. Wei Wei Bai smiled. "What's your name?" Yuan Xian was silent for a moment before saying in a low voice, "Xiao Bao." As soon as he said this name, Yuan Xian's eyebrows twitched. This was his nickname. Other than his father, who had died early, no one dared to call him by this name. Even his mother couldn't. Just as he was about to change his words, he saw the girl in front of him lower her head and smile. Her eyes were bright as if they were full of stars. Xiao Bao. This name. Was it very funny? Yuan Xian's eyes became cruel. She dared to laugh at him. She was reckless. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai raise her head. Her eyes were gentle, but her smile was unusually innocent and sincere. I think your parents also cherish and love you. This name is the best they can expect of you. If they didn't like her, they wouldn't have given her such a nickname. It was because they loved her too much that they doted on her so casually. The cruelty and distortion in Yuan Xian's eyes dissipated bit by bit. Instead, he was a little embarrassed. He could clearly endure and deal with that girl, Lu Xinglan, patiently and maturely. Why did he feel like he didn't know where to put his limbs when facing her? Wei Wei Bai suddenly looked back. Her voice was gentle. Then I'll leave first. The banquet should have started. I don't know if the palace maid is in a hurry to go to the toilet and left me here. I'm not familiar with this place, so I don't dare to wander around and cause trouble. Yuan Xian was silent for a moment. Suddenly, he took a step forward. I will take you to the banquet hall. The palace maid deliberately brought her here and took a few detours. She didn't know where to go if she walked by herself. Wei Wei Bai walked out of the dark with a lantern in her hand. The slender and elegant girl smiled sweetly. Okay, thank you, young Master Xiaobao. Young Master Xiaobao. Yuan Xian froze for a moment, then turned and walked away with his head lowered. Wei Wei Bai followed along. They were a few steps away from each other, neither too far nor too close. It was an unusually polite distance. Wei Wei Bai would occasionally ask a few more questions, such as where did he work and whether he had known her husband for a long time. Yuan Xian couldn't come up with anything at the moment, so he could only fly into a rage out of humiliation. Why are you asking so many questions? Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Yuan Xian stopped talking for a moment, thinking that he had scared her. However, he heard her say softly, I just want to get to know my husband. I'm a woman who stays at home every day. I don't know how difficult it is for him to be outside. With one more friend, it will be easier for him. When Yuan Xian heard this, he was immediately enraged. But her eyes were gentle, delicate, and weak. He was also afraid of scaring her. She could only suppress her anger and say sarcastically, he's so good. Who doesn't respect and love him? When he goes out, those unmarried girls throw flowers and fruits at him. He can open a shop. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she immediately laughed, he's really popular. Yuan Xian sneered, aren't you afraid that he likes women now and will go out to attract bees and butterflies? Wei Wei Bai shook her head lightly, I only want him to be well. Everything else doesn't matter. Yuan Xian felt the anger in his chest turn into a sharp sword. It was so twisted that his heart hurt. Why was Lu Xinglan so good? Would she die if she didn't praise him? When Yuan Xian saw that they had arrived at the banquet hall, he casually pointed to the inner hall of the womenfolk. There, just go in. When a little eunuch saw that there was a distinguished guest, he immediately came out to greet them respectfully. Chapter 28-24. When he saw Yuan Xian, his eyes almost popped out and he was about to kneel down in fear. However, he saw Yuan Xian staring at him coldly like the god of death. The little eunuch trembled and couldn't say a word. Then he said, this is Lu Xinglan's wife. Why aren't you welcoming her in and serving her well? If you don't serve her well, be careful of your brains. This sentence came out too smoothly. Yuan Xian immediately shut up. He was worried that Wei Wei Bai would hear something. He couldn't help but look back and see that Wei Wei Bai wasn't paying attention to him. Instead, she was looking around curiously. The scenery here was good. There were flowers everywhere. Girls liked this kind of decoration. He pursed his lips. Knowing that she didn't notice, he couldn't help but sigh in relief. Then he turned and said to Wei Wei Bai, then I'll leave first. I still have something to do. Wei Wei Bai hurriedly bowed and said to him, take care, young Master Xiaobao. Yuan Xian curled his lips indifferently and left in large strides. When he reached the corner of the flowers, his face suddenly turned red. Young Master Xiaobao, it was the first time he knew that his nickname sounded so good. He couldn't help but murmur, Xiaobao, why was it so disgusting and pretentious? Yuan Xian's eyebrows twitched. He felt that he was bewitched. He flung his sleeves angrily and then stepped on the stairs to the main hall. The head eunuch rushed over. His face was covered in cold sweat and he was so scared that his legs were trembling. Your Majesty, this servant has finally found you. You scared this servant to death. Suddenly, he disappeared. There were so many people at the palace banquet. What should he do if something happened? He even called the guards away. Was he trying to scare people to death? If something happened to the little emperor, they would all lose their heads. Yuan Xian coldly said, Get lost. Is Lu Xinglan here? The head eunuch immediately said, Yes, she is in the main hall. She is preparing to meet you with the civil and military officials. Yuan Xian said, He knows his manners. These words were said in a cold and murderous tone. The head eunuch was shocked. Your Majesty, you must be patient. The assassination attempt earlier had already infuriated Lu Xinglan. What if Lu Xinglan had the thought of rebelling against him again? In the end, wasn't Lu Xinglan the person that the southern nation was relying on? Without him, the northern Qi army would not be able to hold on. More than half of the generals in the imperial court wanted to rebel. The head eunuch wiped his sweat with his hand. He really didn't know how to persuade him. Yuan Xian smiled coldly. We know what to do. If you keep blabbering, I'll cut off your tongue. The eunuch immediately shut his mouth, not daring to speak. When he sat on the throne, he saw the civil and military officials below him bowing and congratulating him on his birthday. The leader was Lu Xinglan. This man stood out like a crane in a flock of chickens. That aura made others feel like they were nothing more than chicken feathers. Yuan Xian felt that it was an eyesore. However, he still put on a fake smile. Why aren't you getting up? There's no need for me to salute you. I heard that you've been injured recently. It's best if you don't overwork yourself. Otherwise, your body won't be able to take it. These words were filled with anger. Lu Xinglan's expression was indifferent. His handsome face was devoid of any emotion. He said indifferently, Thank you for your concern, Your Majesty. I'm fine. Yuan Xian chuckled. Of course you're fine. If you're not fine, who's going to protect our country? These words simply made everyone shudder with fear and trepidation. It was no longer sarcastic, but a blatant provocation. Lu Xinglan's gaze was steady and unwavering. How can this country be protected by me alone? It's all because of Your Majesty's wisdom that thousands of soldiers are willing to risk their lives for you. You'll be able to see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 28-25. Two people's words. They were mocking each other openly and secretly. They were just short of drawing their swords and slashing each other. The atmosphere of the birthday banquet was bleak and terrifying. Yuan Xian also knew that he couldn't hold back his anger. He gritted his teeth and said, My dear minister, you should take care of yourself. Don't die early. I have a lot of support for you. Lu Xinglan lowered his eyes, but his body was straight and elegant. He said coldly, I am afraid that I can't live up to Your Majesty's expectations. Could they still have a good chat today? Was he going to throw his cup and draw his sword the next moment? The minister had already taken 3 steps back, afraid that he would be affected. Finally, Yuan Xian forced himself to calm down. All right, it's getting late. Let's start the banquet. The main hall was filled with male ministers. The family members were in the inner hall. They couldn't come here. Yuan Xian could only look at Lu Xinglan, and Lu Xinglan could only look at Yuan Xian. The more they looked, the more impatient they became. Lu Xinglan drank a cup of wine and thought about it. Why was Yuan Xian, this brat, so impatient? Today's arrangement didn't have any intention of making things difficult for him. She didn't expect him to mock her verbally. Yuan Xian wouldn't do anything that didn't benefit him. But mocking him just now, she couldn't think of any benefits. Lu Xinglan swirled the wine in her cup. His incomparably cold eyes were reflected in the wine. Forget it. She meant to eat a few mouthfuls and then go fetch Wei Wei. They went to watch the show. As for Yuan Xian, he could do whatever he wanted. As long as they didn't disturb him, everything would be fine. Yuan Xian was also drinking to drown his sorrows. The eunuch beside him didn't dare to persuade him. He could only ask someone to add water to the wine. He didn't dare to let Yuan Xian drink anything wrong. Yuan Xian was cruel. But the eunuchs in the palace were the most loyal. Without his penis, he could only treat the royal family as his subordinates. He felt that it was natural to be beaten, scolded, and punished. All of them were proud to serve the royal family. They were even more protective of Yuan Xian. This was the duty of a servant. Suddenly, Yuan Xian looked at Lu Xinglan and asked coldly, "Where is Lu Xinglan going later?" Seeing how perfunctory he was, he wouldn't stay for long. Yet, he brought a female. He had no idea why he had brought her here. She was just a concubine. Wouldn't she be humiliated if she was thrown into the group of women in the inner palace? Could it be that Lu Xinglan thought that Wei Wei Bai was of a lowly status and wanted to defile her like this? Yuan Xian's expression turned much colder. Immediately, he threw the quilt aside. Send the head palace maid over to see who is making things difficult for the womenfolk Lu Xinglan brought. The head eunuch immediately understood. "Your Majesty, are you going to make things difficult for his womenfolk and humiliate him?" His Majesty's recent hostility towards Lu Xinglan was too obvious. The Grand Empress Dowager should not have thought of this in such a short time. When Yuan Xian heard this, he looked coldly at this slave. For a moment, the great eunuch felt the stare of death. Then, he automatically turned around and lay down. Yuan Xian kicked his butt and coldly said, "Just go when I tell you to go. Have the head palace maid follow her at all times. Whoever makes things difficult for her is to be put on my list and wait for me to deal with them." The head eunuch was confused. What was going on? He was clearly fighting to the death with Lu Xinglan. Why did he turn around and take care of his womenfolk? Could it be that His Majesty knew that he had to endure the humiliation but couldn't bring himself to do it? He could only compensate Lu Xinglan's womenfolk to maintain a good relationship with her. The head eunuch felt a headache coming on. He didn't know what these big shots were thinking. Of course, he also needed to know. If he knew too much, he would be beheaded. Chapter 28-26. Lu Xinglan was paying attention to Yuan Xian's movements, but he didn't know why he sent the head eunuch out. It didn't matter what he did. He knew the layout of the palace, the timing of the guard change, and the situation. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Yuan Xian didn't make any arrangements today. It was purely to annoy him. Lu Xinglan was in a good mood, so he didn't mind. Seeing that it was about time, he got up and bid farewell. Yuan Xian looked at him coldly, then snorted eerily. "Take care, my dear minister." Lu Xinglan revealed a rare smile. "It's lively outside the palace. I'll go take a walk with my wife. If your Majesty wants to play, I can be your Majesty's guard." He was actually just saying it casually. People had to be polite. It was just a matter of pleasantries. Who would take it seriously? How could Yuan Xian go out with him? He was afraid of him, and he was also wary of him. Follow him out. Yuan Xian was most afraid that he would kill him in a place where no one was around. Lu Xinglan finished speaking and was about to leave. But he saw a trace of intense struggle on Yuan Xian's face. Lu Xinglan's expression was strange. Why was he struggling? Yuan Xian fidgeted for a while. Lu Xinglan looked at him strangely. This behavior, then Yuan Xian raised his chin and snorted. Since my dear minister is so enthusiastic, then, he hesitated for a moment. Lu Xinglan already saw it. He was about to slip away and pretend that he didn't hear him. But Yuan Xian had already gotten up and ran faster than him. Then I'll reluctantly let you follow me. Lu Xinglan, can you be more shameless? Can't you understand polite words? It was like asking a guest to leave and asking him to stay for a meal. Why are you leaving? Why don't you stay and have a meal together? There's food to eat. Fine, I won't leave. Scram, eat your head. Lu Xinglan's expression darkened, and he immediately followed him. It was rare that he was going to watch a show with Wei Wei. Why did he have to squeeze with Yuan Xian? Wasn't Yuan Xian afraid that he would kill him and rebel? Why wasn't he afraid now? Was Yuan Xian sure that he wouldn't rebel? Lu Xinglan's handsome face darkened. One by one, the emperor and his minister went to the inner hall to look for her. Because Lu Xinglan walked quickly, she didn't pay much attention to Yuan Xian's path. He thought that Yuan Xian was just following him. In the inner hall, Wei Wei Bai was eating. This dish is pretty good. He had never heard of such sarcastic discussions. General Lu's concubine. It's nothing special. It's very ugly. Wei Wei Bai paused in her actions and narrowed her eyes. Then, she slowly raised her head and saw a woman wearing a head full of gold hairpins. She was dressed like a turkey and was laughing and talking about her. Look at her beady eyes and round face. How can she tempt General Lu? Wei Wei Bai put down her chopsticks. He said to the system, "Who is this?" The system said, "Princess, I think." Like the wife of Yuan Xian's little cannon fodder clan's royal uncle or something. In terms of seniority, he was quite high. Wei Wei Bai said, "She said I'm ugly." The system thought for a while. No, beady eyes and round face. Isn't that an objective evaluation? Wei Wei Bai, the system reacted. No, your eyes are very beautiful. They are authentic walnut eyes. How is your face like a round face? It's much prettier than a round face. This was a compliment. One had to compliment someone who didn't know how. Are you a spy sent by the enemy? Wei Wei Bai's original intention to kill the princess was ruined by the system. She felt that the system was more detestable. Forget it. Wei Wei Bai continued to eat. Who asked her to be a Buddhist? If she was hot-blooded in the past, she would have cornered the princess and beat her until she couldn't take care of herself. Just as she was thinking about that, a palace maid who was standing in the dark walked out. Without hesitation, she picked up a cup of water and splashed it on the princess's face. The princess was furious. "You," the palace maid bowed. "Your servant was sent by His Majesty. The weather is hot, so I'm here to wash the princess's face." The princess almost couldn't swallow her anger. But she didn't dare to speak. Who didn't know about Yuan Xian's brutal reputation? It wasn't surprising that he did anything. But why did he suddenly target her? What did she do? Before she could figure it out, all the palace maids in the hall knelt down and bowed at the same time. Long live His Majesty. The princess trembled as she saw Yuan Xian walk in with a dark face. And the person behind him was actually Lu Xinglan. When the two men walked in, their imposing manner made the inner hall seem dull and dull. Wei Wei Bai had just eaten, so her reaction was a little slow. Before she could get up, she saw everyone kneeling. She looked up. Ha, Yuan Xian, that bastard. And Lu Xinglan, that bastard. She also wanted to get up, but her expression was a little blank. But she saw Yuan Xian walk over and say to her, "Let's go out and play." Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely, then looked at the people kneeling in the hall. Yuan Xian then realized that his identity had been exposed. He felt a little guilty, so he lowered his hands and said carefully, "They're just playing. It's very lively outside. There are juggles and plays, and all kinds of shops and stalls. Later, there will be lantern dances and fireworks." Wei Wei Bai stared at him for a while, then smiled. "It's very lively." Yuan Xian immediately smiled happily. And Lu Xinglan, who was a few steps behind, saw this scene and felt that something was wrong. Especially when it was possible that Bai Weiwei would laugh along. He kept feeling that something was wrong. Chapter 28-27. The circus troupe was unusually lively. There were all kinds of fire-breathing, stilts, and people-stacked people. Wei Wei Bai rarely went out. She carried a little rabbit lantern in her hand and walked with Lu Xinglan. Yuan Xian swaggered in front. Just now, the two men had already given in to each other. "Your Majesty, this subject and my wife are of low status. How dare we walk side by side with your Majesty?" Lu Xinglan pulled Wei Wei Bai behind her unhurriedly. Then, she bowed politely, but her eyes were staring coldly at Yuan Xian. She didn't have any self-awareness of her low status at all. Yuan Xian smiled perfunctorily. "Oh, I see that my beloved subject likes to ride to my bedroom on horseback. I thought that my beloved subject is used to ignoring the rules. Lu Xinglan, this subject will change now. Please walk in front." Yuan Xian still wanted to mock her, but he saw Wei Wei Bai timidly looking at him from behind Lu Xinglan. The corners of the girl's eyes were slightly pink, like the delicate beauty of peach blossoms. Under the light, she was soft and beautiful. He choked for a moment. Then, Yuan Xian walked in front, followed by Lu Xinglan and Wei Wei Bai. The three of them were surrounded by a strange, calm atmosphere. On the contrary, Wei Wei Bai was more relaxed. After all, she came out to play. She didn't want to think about the mission. Lu Xinglan and Yuan Xian were background to her. They weren't as good-looking as the circus that spat out fireballs. She saw a monkey circus and couldn't help but take a few steps forward, but her wrist was grabbed. Wei Wei Bai looked up. Under the bright yellow light, the man glanced indifferently at the circus monkeys. Then, he unhurriedly lowered his eyes and said calmly, "The living things are restless. Don't come closer." Wei Wei Bai chuckled and then took 2 steps back. Lu Xinglan followed and calmly took 2 steps back. She only took a few glances at the monkeys, then carried the rabbit lantern and continued to walk forward. Yuan Xian stretched his ears and didn't turn back to listen to the movements behind him. After making sure that the people behind him were following him, he swaggered forward. Lu Xinglan didn't say anything. She just glanced sideways at the girl beside her and saw that her cheeks were a little flushed. His face also heated up, and his pursed lips curled up slightly. His fingers slowly trailed down her wrist and finally held her soft fingers. Their loose sleeves were next to each other. Under the light, one could occasionally see the gaps between their sleeves. Their fingers were tightly intertwined. Yuan Xian had not left the palace to celebrate with the people for a long time. It was rare for him to come out. And he was with Lu Xinglan, the person he hated the most. However, his mood had nothing to do with annoyance. Instead, it was occupied by another emotion. He was a little nervous. There was also some apprehension. He was even excited. He walked with his hands behind his back, listening to the footsteps behind him. Lu Xinglan's footsteps were unusually light. Because of his high level of martial arts. Wei Wei Bai's footsteps were also light because she was petite. He tried hard to identify the footsteps, but he was still unable to determine which one belonged to her. He was afraid that the person behind him would get tired from walking too fast, so he slowed down his pace. However, due to his status, he didn't dare to look behind him openly. After all, his status was noble. It was not appropriate for him to look at other people's wives so blatantly. Yuan Xian narrowed his eyes, but he really wanted to take a look. Should he take a peek? Coincidentally, there was a bustling opera troupe in front of them. It seemed that the stage hadn't been set up yet. This group of performers were talking and laughing as they went to buy things. Yuan Xian hated the smell of these people's cosmetics and wanted to move away. However, he paused, thinking that if he turned around in the crowd, it wouldn't be too abrupt. Chapter 28. So he didn't dodge. Instead, he deliberately went forward. The crowd rushed over, and Yuan Xian took the opportunity to turn around. The sound of a knife scraping through cloth came from beside his ear. He was greedy for pleasure. Although he didn't like Lu Xinglan since he was young and practiced some martial arts, it was just fancy moves. However, years of experience of being assassinated allowed him to distinguish the sound of a knife in the wind. He almost instinctively took 2 steps back. Then he saw a scene that scared him out of his wits. In the crowd, a Huadan took out a short knife from his sleeve and stabbed straight at his chest. Yuan Xian's face was pale. He thought he was going to die. The next moment, Lu Xinglan had already appeared beside him. Her fingers easily reached over and snatched the knife from Huadan's hand. Then she stabbed him back. Just as Huadan was about to scream, Lu Xinglan had already taken a handkerchief from Huadan's waist and stuffed it into his mouth. The opera robe was unusually wide, and there were no traces of blood. When Huadan lay down, he died quietly. It almost didn't cause any commotion. Lu Xinglan didn't want the girl behind her to see such a bloody scene. Although Yuan Xian's face was pale, he didn't dodge. Instead, he deliberately blocked this scene. The two of them thought that it was over. The people who were singing suddenly turned around, pulled out their short knives, and rushed toward Yuan Xian. Lu Xinglan's expression was calm, and her eyes quickly looked back. Seeing that Wei Wei Bai had already retreated to the darkness in front, she didn't leave with a worried expression, but she didn't risk death to come forward. She heaved a sigh of relief, then turned around and grabbed a short knife from a person, and pushed Yuan Xian out of the encirclement. "Let's go, Your Majesty." Yuan Xian came out with her. If he died, he was going to rebel. After all, the emperor was dead, and his life was the greatest rebellion. It was too troublesome to rebel. It was better to save Yuan Xian and let him continue to suffer on the throne. All kinds of thoughts flashed through Lu Xinglan's mind. In the end, she let Yuan Xian go first. She thought that Yuan Xian would run away directly because this guy was very afraid of death. And Wei Wei Bai didn't go forward. The guards who were following from afar had already rushed over. He was in time to protect her. Lu Xinglan stopped all the assassins and was about to make a move. Suddenly, he felt that something was wrong. He turned around abruptly, but did not see Wei Wei Bai. Yuan Xian was also gone. They disappeared together. Lu Xinglan stabbed a few assassins to death. She was still pondering whether Yuan Xian had suddenly become kind and knew to take others with him. Of course, this was just a fleeting thought. Yuan Xian had a grudge against him. She was always thinking about his death. Even if he was being kind, it wouldn't be sent to him either. After all, Wei Wei Bai was his wife, but he took her and ran away. Lu Xinglan finally killed all the assassins. Amidst the screaming crowd on the street, the man stood under the light of the lantern. His exquisite face was hidden against the light, and his black eyes were unusually deep. He suddenly started walking forward. The shadow cast on half of his face made him look cold and gloomy. He finally realized that something was wrong. Yuan Xian's entire line of sight tonight was focused on by Wei Wei. Occasionally, he would not look at her, but it seemed more like he was guilty. What was he guilty of? No, it was not guilty. It was shyness. Lu Xinglan's face was finally exposed to the light. A trace of ruthlessness appeared in his dark eyes. He actually took his wife and ran away. Wei Wei Bai was also dumbfounded. She was watching the show. Assassins came. So be it. It did not affect the show. Chapter 28-29. However, Yuan Xian turned around and ran, leaving Lu Xinglan to deal with the enemy alone. Bai Weiwei was in a good mood when she saw it. She quickly looked at the side mission. Side mission progress, 0. 0 my ass. Yuan Xian ran away when there was an assassin, leaving Lu Xinglan to deal with it alone. How could Lu Xinglan not be angry at such a cowardly bastard who treated other people's lives like ants? Did he not want to remove Yuan Xian from the throne? Calling Lu Xinglan a tortoise was still polite. This was an old tortoise. He was too good at enduring. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. She was about to bring the rabbit lantern to Lu Xinglan to cause some trouble. Yuan Xian was halfway there when he suddenly thought of something. He hesitated for 3 seconds, turned around abruptly, and ran towards her. The pale-faced youth rushed over without hesitation, wanting to hold her hand. Wei Wei Bai took a step back. He only grabbed her sleeve. Yuan Xian pursed his lips and did not say anything. He just firmly pulled her sleeve and ran towards the palace. Wei Wei Bai blinked and said to the system, "Yo, it's getting cold recently. Give Lu Xinglan a hat and let him experience my virtuous and beautiful heart, okay?" The system was speechless. It was silent for a while before saying, "This. I think the green is a bit glaring." It was a good picture of a long-lasting relationship. Let's just focus on our strategy and stop making trouble. If we do something like vomiting blood again, it won't be easy to end it. Wei Wei Bai nodded, "I think so too, so I made the color darker. Dark green looks better. A little green is not enough. A little more and it will be dark green." "System," Wei Wei Bai said faintly, "aren't all turtles green? He likes to be a turtle so much, let him be." "System," what the host said made sense. He should just eat properly. The recent dinner was so luxurious that it took a lot of effort to finish it. Yuan Xian was so nervous that his whole body trembled. He grabbed the girl's soft sleeve, his fingertips also trembling. It did not seem like fear. Instead, it was more like uncontrollable excitement. He caught her. Although it was just a sleeve. When he finally saw the guards, he did not reprimand the soldiers who were too far away. Instead, he turned to look at Wei Wei Bai. The girl behind him seemed to be in a hurry. She was a little out of breath, and her face was a little red. Her eyes were filled with bewilderment and worry. She didn't care about anything else and turned back to look at the street in front of her. Lu Xinglan was facing an enemy on the street. Yuan Xian said unhappily, his martial arts are high, he won't die. Don't go over and cause trouble. After saying that, he realized that his tone was too condescending. He was very impolite. He shut his mouth in embarrassment. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai turn around worriedly. Hubby, are you really okay? Yuan Xian's heartbeat quickened. He lowered his head and said, yes, I'm fine. He couldn't hurt Lu Xinglan's martial arts even if he used the most powerful shadow assassin in the inner palace. Last time, the ambush that used arrows to assassinate was almost a sure kill array. It was still easily broken by him. He killed Lu Xinglan until he was in despair. How could those mere assassins possibly do any harm to Lu Xinglan? Moreover, those assassins were targeting him. Of course, he was inferior. He was much easier to kill than Lu Xinglan. Thinking of this, the young emperor's arrogant and inferior mentality became a little twisted. There was a hint of grief and anger in the twist. In any case, Lu Xinglan was the stronger one. He was puzzled. Why didn't Lu Xinglan rebel? Chapter 28:30. He was so sullen sitting on the throne. He might as well not sit and let Lu Xinglan sit by herself. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so indignant. After he sat at the highest point, he endured the greatest pressure and the loneliest life. But he still couldn't get the supreme power and reward. Lu Xinglan got all the benefits of this lousy position. He was only left with that loneliness. What did he want to do here? Yuan Xian's expression was gloomy and irritable. The few guards beside him immediately trembled. They knew that Yuan Xian was about to explode again. He was often like this. Once his emotions exploded, he wouldn't stop until he killed a few people around him. Suddenly, his fingers tightened, but he saw the girl in front of him lift her sleeve. Then, he realized that he was grabbing her clothes. The violence in the young man's eyes lessened, and even became a little unnatural. He wanted to let go of his fingers, but he thought, why should he let go? The sleeve he was grabbing was his. So Yuan Xian grabbed even harder. Wei Wei Bai didn't care that her sleeve was being grabbed. The worry between her brows didn't fade, but increased. What's wrong with you? She whispered softly, her voice soft and urgent. Yuan Xian pursed his lips. His eyes were a little red, and he didn't say a word. Wei Wei Bai took a step forward, but felt that it wasn't good to be too close, so she took 2 steps back. But she saw the young man in front of her suddenly take a step forward. When she stepped back, he moved forward. The result of retreating was that Bai Weiwei directly hit the wall. Yuan Xian definitely wouldn't do such a thing normally. But he was in a special period now. His entire person was surrounded by violent emotions, and he was much bolder. His moral bottom line had been completely exposed. He smiled coldly. If you're so worried about him, why don't you die together with him? They all liked Lu Xinglan. Everyone liked him. He was a piece of gold. Many noble people would be moved when they saw him. Humph. In this world, except for the people of the north, he probably hated Lu Xinglan the most. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be a little surprised that he said such words. She moved her lips, and her eyes were covered with a layer of mist. Her gentle eyes lowered slightly. The sorrowful girl did not have much of an expression on her face. But it made one's heart ache when they saw it. Yuan Xian's insulting words came to a halt. He opened his mouth again and stuttered, You. Don't worry. If you can't die, you can't die. You don't have to die for love. He might as well not have comforted her at all. Sure enough, he saw her. She didn't say a word. She pursed her lips and looked at him coldly. It was rare for the little emperor to treat someone well, but he knew that he had messed up again. His emotions were unstable and he would often explode. This was the first time he had erupted with such regret and fear. Obviously, he didn't want to scare her. Wei Wei Bai looked at him indifferently and gently opened her eyes. Her eyes were red, and her voice was weak. "My husband is a loyal person, I hope your majesty doesn't hate him so much." Sure enough, he saw through it. He hated Lu Xinglan. In the beginning, he was unwilling to reveal his identity because everyone knew. Lu Xinglan was not on good terms with him. She was Lu Xinglan's woman, so how could she not know? Yuan Xian gripped her sleeves tightly. He took another step forward and his shadow loomed over her. It almost covered her under his shadow. His voice was low. "I hate Lu Xinglan, but I don't hate you." This word hadn't been said yet. But he felt a chill on his back. Yuan Xian turned around and saw that Lu Xinglan was already standing not far away. The man's eyes were dark, and his slender figure was as sharp as a sharp blade. His face, hidden in the darkness, was pale and exquisite. But there was a cold glint of gloominess. Finally, Lu Xinglan slowly revealed a smile. "Your Majesty, you are very warm to my wife." Chapter 28:31. Under the countless lights, Lu Xinglan's thin lips curved slightly, but there was no warmth in his eyes. Instead, his face that was exposed under the candlelight looked even colder. Yuan Xian was still holding on to Wei Wei Bai's sleeve, forcing her to lean against the wall. It was the pose of a hooligan flirting with an innocent woman. The little emperor was stunned for a moment. He did not expect Lu Xinglan to come back so quickly. He pursed his lips, then reluctantly let go of Wei Wei Bai's sleeve. That hesitation. It made Lu Xinglan's eyes even colder and fiercer. Wei Wei Bai quickly retracted her sleeve, and even shook it, showing that she was not close to the little emperor. Then she squeezed her tears, sobbed, turned around, and ran to Lu Xinglan's side, holding onto his sleeve with both hands. "Young master, you scared me to death." Her watery eyes were hazy, looking at him with grievance and worry. Her fingers could not help but tug at his sleeve, shaking it. Lu Xinglan was expressionless. His eyes were still dark and cold. He stared at Yuan Xian for a while, then slowly his eyes fell on Wei Wei Bai. He stared at her for a long time without saying a word. The atmosphere was very heavy. "System, are you going to do the splits?" In front of the male lead, he flirted with another poor girl. Although he did not show it, he still showed his scumbag nature. Wei Wei Bai was indifferent. "I can't do the splits, I've always been flexible." And when did she flirt with others? She was innocent from the beginning to the end. She was ignorant, pure, innocent, and cute. The system silently vomited. It was immune to its host's narcissism. It vomited because it ate too much. The girl's eyes were full of worry, and a trace of helpless fear. She pursed her lips, tears rolling in her eyes, but did not fall, as if she was afraid of causing trouble for him. Lu Xinglan's heart softened for a moment. He reached out and gently hooked her fingers that were pinching his sleeve. Lu Xinglan's expression was still indifferent and cold. He raised his eyes to look at Yuan Xian. "Your Majesty, it seems that it is not suitable for you to leave the palace. There are a lot of people outside who want to kill you. It is not safe for you to go out." Yuan Xian also curled his lips coldly. "It's not safe for me to go out. Don't I still have my beloved minister to protect me?" Lu Xinglan stared at him indifferently for a while. Her eyes were extremely cold. Then, he finally sneered. "Your Majesty, how do you know that I am not one of the people who killed you?" These words were truly heartrending. Yuan Xian's expression changed as all the blood drained from his face. He pursed his lips and wanted to explode, but he couldn't help but look at the person beside Lu Xinglan. Lu Xinglan noticed the look in his eyes. Since when did the extremely brutal Yuan Xian need to look at whose expression when he wanted to lose his temper? This cruel little incapable ruler. He actually cared about the thoughts of another person. Lu Xinglan looked at him coldly. Yuan Xian glared back coldly and put on a fake smile. Looks like my beloved minister is quite humorous. On the way back, the atmosphere was heavy with a surge of killing intent. The palace gates were wide open. The head eunuch led the palace maids and eunuchs to wait for them. Yuan Xian was walking forward when he suddenly stopped in his tracks and turned back. He saw Lu Xinglan holding Wei Wei Bai's hand. His footsteps were slow and light, deliberately accommodating to Wei Wei Bai's speed. Under the sparkling moonlight, the girl's face was exceptionally beautiful and soft. Her eyes were gentle as she raised her chin and looked at the man beside her with admiration. Yuan Xian's eyes turned red. He couldn't hold his breath and felt extremely uncomfortable. Then, he flung his sleeves and walked directly into the palace. The palace gates closed slowly. Lu Xinglan bowed calmly outside the palace gates. The comma. Chapter 28-32. In the gap of the palace door. Yuan Xian turned around and faced the door sideways until the gap of the door separated the girl beside Lu Xinglan. Only then did the malice in his eyes appear. Lu Xinglan, who was standing straight outside, also slowly looked up. His eyes were cold and ruthless. The door closed with a bang. Lu Xinglan then turned around and pulled Wei Wei Bai forward. His fingers were a little forceful. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but want to withdraw her hand. However, she realized that the man suddenly pursed his thin lips and his eyes were as dark as ink. He lowered his head and glanced at her indifferently. Suddenly, his fingers loosened and completely left her hand. Wei Wei Bai, ? The moment his fingers left her fingertips, he reacted quickly and tugged at her sleeve. Her sleeves instantly tightened. Wei Wei Bai blinked and looked at him in confusion. However, she realized that Lu Xinglan suddenly took a step forward and was too close. She couldn't help but take a step back. It was like a chain reaction. He pressed on step by step, and she retreated helplessly. Suddenly, her back bumped into something. It was a dark corner, a red round pillar under a long corridor. The lantern beside it was emitting a faint cold light. It fell into the man's dark eyes and brought a hint of cold luster. Just now, his voice was faint and suppressed. How do you feel when he grabs you like this? Wei Wei Bai was forced to lean against the pillar. The man's aura was strong and cold. He was rarely so sharp and scary when he was with her. It was more like a weapon in a scabbard with a faint sandalwood fragrance, making people forget that he came from a place of wind and snow. It was full of sharpened ruthlessness. At this moment, the man had such ruthlessness. His eyes were cold and deep as he lowered his head and stared at her. It was as if as long as she revealed a trace of something wrong, it was as if he could cut her. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Instead, she quietly raised her head and met his gaze. This wasn't a confrontation. It was confusion. There was a trace of confusion in her eyes, and the corners of her eyes were red. Her fair face was like a pond lotus in the dark night. She was slender and elegant, with a fragrance that could easily attract people's attention. She was so beautiful, even though she was standing in the palace. It was also exceptionally outstanding. It was no wonder that the little fatuous ruler would be moved. Others might not know, but Lu Xinglan did. The little fatuous prince was muddle-headed in other areas. Moreover, he was always ready to go against him, and always used all sorts of absurd reasons to deduct his military funds. However, he had never truly indulged in debauchery. The little fatuous prince was not very interested in women. He's ambitious and doesn't like women. He's wholeheartedly fighting with him for the right to rule the country. It was unknown whether he had ever touched those women in the harem. That was why her heart sank when she realized that Yuan Xian's feelings for her were not normal. After all, for a woman, it was the harem, the throne, and the emperor. He would be more attractive than the other one. Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely for a while, then looked at her sleeves. They were pulled so tightly that it was difficult for her to break free. Lu Xinglan was still motionless, wrestling with him like this. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips, the confusion in her eyes fading away bit by bit, like the clouds parting to see the moon. She thought of something, and the corners of her eyes curved. The young girl's eyes were charming when she didn't deliberately seduce people. She deliberately looked up. It was even more seductive. Like a delicate flower blooming, the young girl took a small step forward, her soft and fragrant body moving forward. She reached out and carefully hugged his waist. The young girl was petite. Blocked in front of the pillar, the man's slender figure enveloped her. Not far from them was the brightly lit street. Slash. Chapter 28:33. She seemed to feel that she was too bold, but she still overcame this feeling of shyness and leaned her face against his firm chest. Lu Xinglan's body stiffened. He also didn't expect her to suddenly take the initiative. And it was in public. Even if he blocked her body, it was an extremely difficult thing for a girl to do. Wei Wei Bai was like a lazy cat. Her cheek rubbed against his chest, feeling the man's sudden tremble. She whispered, "Lu Xinglan, are you jealous?" Lu Xinglan's lips tightened. He didn't say anything, but there was already a broken light in his eyes. It wasn't as sharp and cold as before. Wei Wei Bai looked up. There was a smile in her eyes. It was broken, as pure and beautiful as the moonlight. Lu Xinglan felt that his emotions were all seen through by this pair of eyes, including his clumsy attempt to cover up his feelings. His face turned red from embarrassment. He was still silent. The smile in Wei Wei Bai's eyes became more obvious. She slowly tiptoed, "You're asking me how I feel." "I don't feel anything." Her lips came to his jaw. The man's jawline was very good. The perfect outline of his face had a sharp and exquisite beauty. In the shadows, he looked especially delicate and elegant. His appearance was more like that of a refined scholar, not a boorish military general. The girl's kiss was too light. It was like a light breeze, with the fragrance of flowers. Her fingers were tight as she hugged his waist. Then she buried her face in his arms. Her voice was low and soft, "Lu Xinglan, the one I like is you. I don't have any feelings for anyone else." The man didn't say anything. Just when Wei Wei Bai thought that she didn't work hard enough, causing the favorability to stagnate. The man's fingers gently pinched her chin, making her look up. The man's thin and cold lips were already on her lips. The soft breath, the man's sandalwood. In the dark corner, under the swaying light of the lantern. It was like a beautiful dream. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 88. When she attended the birthday banquet, she rode a horse and rode a carriage alone. When they returned, they held hands and walked home under the moonlight. After returning home, the two of them washed up separately. Only then did he go to bed. Wei Wei Bai curled up in Lu Xinglan's arms and closed her eyes with a gentle expression. Then, he excitedly said to the system, "Lu Xinglan, that little bastard, must be thinking of rebelling." Her favorable impression of him was so high. Moreover, Yuan Xian had also revealed his true colors, a green hat wholesaler. Lu Xinglan knew what Yuan Xian was thinking. She definitely wanted to strangle him to death. The system replied, yes, when that bastard grabbed your sleeve, the rebellion index jumped from 0 to 60. 60 was jumping back and forth on the edge of rebellion. An index that could jump down at any moment. A little more provocation and they would definitely rebel. Wei Wei Bai showed a gratified smile and was about to praise herself. The system continued, and when you hugged and kissed him, the rebellion index went back to 0. Wei Wei Bai, the system continued, and it made the male lead even more determined to live in seclusion in the countryside. Wei Wei Bai's mouth twitched, her mind was a little confused. Wouldn't a normal man be angry for a woman? Someone was already coveting your woman and was planning to take her. A normal man would pick up a stool and beat someone to death. Why did he want to live in seclusion in the countryside? Shouldn't it be that I want to kill 100 flowers after blooming? Am I going to rebel? Chapter 28-34. Damn, Lu Xinglan was indeed not a normal man. He was a tortoise. The system was still analyzing. Maybe the male lead felt that since the emperor likes you and you like him, he took you away. It was an exceptionally carefree and beautiful thing. Wei Wei Bai said calmly, don't say any more, I'll take a break. After taking a break. Only then did she hear the host's eerie voice. Ah, I saw that green grassland. On the grassland, there was a group of tortoises knitting hats. Why was she singing? The system was depressed. Then it picked up the bird's nest soup and drank it slowly. It had eaten too much recently, so it drank something light. The days passed unhurriedly. After the birthday banquet, Lu Xinglan was busy for a few days. It seemed that her official duties had increased. And she often had to go out to socialize. Because of the matter with Yuan Xian, Lu Xinglan was also very cautious about the timing of her trips. And recently, the northern countries seemed to be ready to make trouble again. Lu Xinglan flipped through the reports of the northern countries' movements at the border every day. And in the palace. Yuan Xian was impatiently listening to Yuanda's complaints. Tell me, what's wrong with me? I heard that last time at your birthday banquet, Xinglan brought that bitch to attend, right? And he kept protecting her. The matter of Lu Xinglan falling in love with a concubine. It had already spread throughout the capital. Who didn't know that General Lu, who had never been moved in 10,000 years and hated women? He was now infatuated. Yuan Xian's brows were tightly knitted. When he heard the word bitch, his eyes turned violent. But Yuanda was unforgiving. I killed that bitch. Brother, you have to help me. She was just a half-sister. Yuan Xian didn't like her to begin with. With this provocation, he immediately exploded. He picked up a pen holder in front of him and smashed it hard on Yuanda's head. Yuanda was smashed to the ground, his head full of blood. She screamed in disbelief, brother, how can you do this to me? Yuan Xian said gloomily, don't mention Lu Xinglan in front of me, and you're not allowed to talk about her. Her or him. Yuanda wasn't stupid and reacted in time. This sheath was not the same as Lu Xinglan's, he. It was Wei Wei Bai. She looked at him in disbelief for a while. Suddenly, her whole body began to tremble. Yuanda laughed wildly. He pointed at Yuan Xian and said loudly, didn't you have a weak body? Why are you interested in women? No one knew about this. Lu Xinglan didn't know either. After all, it was a scandal of the royal family, and Yuan Xian was the only legitimate prince. The rightful heir to the throne. Even if some of the older officials knew about it, they still kept it a secret. Yuan De only found out by accident. Yuan Xian's face darkened as killing intent surged in his eyes. He was about to kill Yuan De. The bloodied Yuan De suddenly crawled forward with a sinister smile. Royal brother, you like that bitch and I like Xinglan. How about we join hands and lock them up? Yuan Xian paused. Yuan De smiled even more happily. She wasn't normal, she knew it. This crazy and decadent royal family had done all sorts of dirty things. No one who grew up in this place was normal. Yuan Xian was the same. She was just as crazy as him. Yuan De laughed bitterly. Since we can't get what we love, why do we need them to be willing? Just lock them up. Even if we can't get their hearts, we still need them. Yuan Xian was silent. Yuan De cried pitifully again. This is the last way. When we catch the two of them, you'll share the Bai one and I'll share Xinglan. How fair is that? Yuan Xian sneered, you're crazy. For Lu Xinglan, you're neither human nor ghost. Yuan De wiped the blood off his face. He looked ferocious and sad. Yes, I'm crazy. What about you? Yuan Xian looked at her coldly and suddenly said, I'm tired. Get lost. Yuan De staggered to his feet and walked out. As he walked, he laughed again. Because she knew Yuan Xian agreed. On Wei Wei Bai's side, she was embroidering a turtle. It was a handkerchief for Lu Xinglan. As she was embroidering, she listened to the live broadcast of the situation in the palace. The system said, these two are perverts. They want to cuckold both of you at the same time. They want to share one with each of them. Do they think the male lead and the host are human? Wei Wei Bai looked at the rebellion index of 0 with resentment. Let's split them, she said as she embroidered. The system was confused. Split what? Wei Wei Bai said, Lu Xinglan, that bastard, will share with the ugly princess. I'll share with Yuan Xian, that bastard. The system looked at the host who had given up and asked, if both of you get a share, what does the male lead get? Wei Wei Bai said, what else? She laughed softly, let's split the cuckold. If he didn't rebel, she might as well give him the Green Turtle Award. To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click the button. Chapter 28:35. It was late at night again. Lu Xinglan sat on the chair with a cold expression. Xan Wu was organizing the map he drew. Lu Xinglan looked at him indifferently, then turned to look at the moon outside the window. She was probably asleep. The candlelight in the study had been lit all night for half a month. The North had already raided the border of the South 3 times. Each time, they were beaten back by the army he trained. And he was in the capital, handling letters every day, and sending all the plans to the border. The map was more than half of the North's terrain. Lu Xinglan had been collecting all the terrain information of the North since a long time ago. He also planted countless spies in the North, spies in the North's royal family. Lu Xinglan's confidants were all clear. Lu Xinglan's goal was to completely conquer the North. With the destruction of the North, he would usher in 100 years of stability in the South. This wish was the wish of many generations of the Lu family. Lu Xinglan had also had this wish since he was young. But ever since he met the person he liked, his thoughts were more about living a peaceful life with her. After all, once the war started in the North, he would have to leave this place. He would go to the border and start the northern expedition. How could Lu Xinglan bear to take Wei Wei Bai with him? The snow at the border of the North was too cold, and the wind was too strong. She was a delicate southern woman who grew up in the stable capital. Even though she suffered a little when she was a slave, she didn't suffer more because she had a good life. Instead, she was sent to his side and finally accepted his protection. So in Lu Xinglan's eyes, he looked at Wei Wei Bai as if he was looking at a white and soft dumpling. He couldn't bear to pinch her, afraid that he would hurt her. He cherished her so much. How could he let her go out with him to suffer? Moreover, there were almost no flowers at the border of the north. There was only snow and some plants that were persevering in the snow. They were all bare and dark. They didn't look good at all. Lu Xinglan pursed his lips and stared at the candlelight. Xan Wu said slowly, "Think about it before you make a decision. The North's probing this time was just to see if they could take advantage of you when you weren't around. After all, they were scared by Lu Xinglan. He was also crippled. Now, they had to offer a large sum of money to the Southern Empire every year for peace and stability. If this went on for too long, the Northland would definitely not be able to take it. Because the Northland was currently poor. Silver was their life. And Lu Xinglan deliberately made them pay. If a country was short of money, it would not be able to provide for its army. Without an army, they would begin to weaken. If he continued to weaken like this, even if he did not attack him. Without any major changes, there was nothing to be afraid of in this country. And these few times, when he was not around, his army was able to beat them to a pulp. In the future, he probably wouldn't dare to probe anymore. They could only sell their pots and pans and take out money to ensure their safety. If it were in the past, Lu Xinglan wouldn't have waited so leisurely and let Northland go bankrupt. Instead, they would reorganize the army and ride into the place where the Southern Empire had a blood feud with them for generations. But now, he hesitated. Xan Wu also saw it. It was a path filled with blood and gore. Even someone as strong as Lu Xinglan couldn't guarantee that she would be able to safely destroy the Northern Kingdom without a hitch. He wanted to destroy a country. Even if it was a small country, the resistance it encountered was extremely terrifying. Not to mention the Northern Kingdom, which was still strong even though it was crippled. If this battle continued, who knew how long it would take? Lu Xinglan crossed his hands and supported his chin. His indifferent eyes were deep and dark. Comma. Chapter 28:36. He didn't answer Xan Wu. He had drawn those maps one by one over the past few years. Every route on it was planned by him. How to use the fastest and least loss to take over the northern country. He watched as the last map was put away by Xan Wu. He only looked up indifferently and said softly, "Let's wait a little longer." His long-cherished wish of many years. He wouldn't let it go for a while. But he still hesitated. Xan Wu nodded in understanding. Lu Xinglan didn't stay up all night this time. When he returned to his room, it was just before dawn. In the deep darkness, a candlelight was burning faintly. When Lu Xinglan walked in, he saw the needle and thread casually placed on the table. She wasn't good at needlework. The embroidered handkerchief was made of an unknown animal. But in Lu Xinglan's eyes, it was extremely beautiful. He quietly came to the bedside and saw the girl quietly hugging the blanket, sleeping with her eyes lowered. There was no trace of blood on her soft face. This was an unhealthy pale complexion. Lu Xinglan knew that it was the after effects of the drug that deprived her of fertility. Her body had been exploited excessively and was a little weaker than ordinary people. It might not be obvious on normal days. But Lu Xinglan reached out and gently landed on her fingertips. Even after sleeping for so long, her slightly cold fingers still didn't have any warmth. He quietly got onto the bed. His warm fingers gently covered her fingers, helping her warm them. Suddenly she turned over and, like a small animal seeking solace, put her arms around him. Lu Xinglan didn't move. In fact, he was even more careful. He couldn't bear to wake her up. Her long hair fell on his shoulders. The side of her face was leaning against his arm. Her soft breathing was almost inaudible. He could only feel the gentle heat beside his neck. Lu Xinglan pursed his lips, his eyes dark. His fingers gently and slowly landed on her back. He just hugged her like that. Waiting for dawn. He had been too conflicted during this period of time. To go to the northern country or not, to sit there and delay the northern country. To drag it out for decades and destroy it. Or not to drag it out. To spend a period of time and destroy this place. If it was in the past, he would have already moved. And now, he looked down and saw that Wei Wei Bai was frowning. Her eyelashes fluttered and she slowly opened her eyes. She was drowsy and her eyes were misty. She rubbed the corners of her eyes sleepily and yawned. Why is it so late again? Lu Xinglan pursed her lips. After a moment of silence, she said softly, some things are hard to decide. The sleepiness in Wei Wei Bai's eyes disappeared. She leaned closer to him, placing her fingers on his chest and her face on his shoulder. She didn't ask him. Nothing was hard to decide. Instead, she just hugged him quietly. Finally, she heard the man's soft sigh above her head. If I leave you for a while, her fingers suddenly pinched the clothes in front of his chest. However, he didn't say anything. Just like that, they continued to fight in silence. His fingers were trembling. Lu Xinglan immediately stopped talking, afraid that she would scare her. After a long time, dawn had arrived. Weak light began to seep through the screen and into the house. Lu Xinglan finally heard the soft and helpless voice of the girl in her arms. Lu Xinglan, don't you want me anymore? These words were almost inaudible. Fragile as silk, with a hint of panic. Lu Xinglan didn't know why, but the corners of her eyes were dry. The fragility and fear in her words were so obvious. // Chapter 28:37. Lu Xinglan was silent for a while before he reached out to hold the back of her head. She couldn't help but look up. In the dim light, the corners of the girl's eyes were red, and there was a hint of redness on her soft and fair face. She was sad. He stared at her quietly for a while before he sighed and said, I can't bear to leave. As soon as he finished speaking, he lowered his head and kissed her. He couldn't bear to let her hug him and ask him weakly if he didn't want her anymore. He also couldn't bear to let go of the girl who comforted him when he died without a burial. Even if he died, she still guarded his grave and burned incense for him. Thousands of people could bear the responsibility of Northern Nation. He was the only one who could protect her. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 90. Just as Lu Xinglan was about to give up on destroying Northern Nation. And when he adopted the strategy of dragging it down. Xan Wu suddenly received news of a mutiny in the border army. It's a small troop that suddenly betrayed and sold the news to Northern Nation. They led a small troop of more than 50 people to join the Northern Nation army. Lu Xinglan's eyes were cold. How much did we lose? Xan Wu, because we didn't expect our own people to betray us, about 200 people died. There was no big battle, but so many people died suddenly. It was too much. Lu Xinglan's eyes were cold. He looked down at the list of the dead attached to the news. Why did they suddenly betray us? Xan Wu, the leader, was from Northern Nation, but he grew up in Southern Nation. With incomplete information, no one expected him to be a Northern Nation spy. Lu Xinglan listened with a cold expression. Is Northern Nation declaring war on me? His voice was unusually cold. On the contrary, the expression on his face was still gentle. Xan Wu frowned. This is strange. Who gave Northern Nation the confidence to provoke us when they suffered so much? This was a betrayal. Northern Nation had completely shed all pretense of cordiality and was going to confront Lu Xinglan. After being beaten to such a state by Lu Xinglan, anyone with a brain problem would know to rest and recuperate. Lu Xinglan frowned as if thinking about something. He pressed his fingers on the list, and there was a hint of bloodlust in his cold eyes. There was silence. Only then did Lu Xinglan look out of the window. He stared for a long time before saying in a soft and cold voice, "Don't be what I think. Yuan Xian isn't that stupid. No matter how much he wanted to kill him, they wouldn't really collude with the Northland royal family to deal with the Southland army." Lu Xinglan sneered. "I've watched him grow up. Although he's muddle-headed and casual, he's not that stupid. He was really using the Northlands to attack him. If he won, Yuan Xian wouldn't do anything. He had lost. There was no one in the Northern Kingdom who could stop them, and they directly rode down to the south. Yuan Xian can just wait to be the ruler of a fallen country." Xan Wu tied up the letter written by Lu Xinglan. He was going to deliver the letter himself. At the same time, he could help Lu Xinglan guard the border. This was to prevent too many things from happening and causing trouble. Xan Wu stuffed the map and the letter into a small bag. After carrying it on his back, he said, "Whatever decision you want to make, I will support you. Even if you don't leave the capital, I can go to the border and solve the problem." Lu Xinglan sat on the chair and didn't say anything. The man's deep eyes were covered by shadows, carrying a trace of coldness. However, when he looked at Xan Wu, the coldness in his eyes disappeared and was replaced by a trace of hesitation. Xan Wu adjusted his bearing. "I'll leave first. Even if you give up protecting the Southland, don't feel burdened. You've done too much for the Southland all these years. So many generations of your family have also sacrificed. Someone has to help you take off the burden." / Chapter 28:38. Even if Lu Xinglan gave up protecting the Southern Nation, who had the right to criticize him? No one. The Lu family had sacrificed for the Southern Nation until now, and only Lu Xinglan was left alive. How could others have the face to ask him to continue sacrificing? Not to mention that Lu Xinglan had done enough all these years. No one blamed him for whatever decision he made. But Lu Xinglan had not given up protecting the Southern Nation all these years, even if the royal family was so muddle-headed and corrupt. He still had not given up on the royal family. And finally, Wei Bai appeared, which made him think of letting go of his heavy burden. Of course, Xan Wu encouraged him. He was glad that there was such a person. She could make Lu Xinglan's life better. When Xan Wu walked out, he saw Wei Bai holding the hem of her long dress and walking over. When she saw him, she smiled. Xan Wu also smiled, then turned around and disappeared. The system also smiled, then silently took a bite of the super luxurious pork chop. Lu Xinglan sat in the study with the door half open. He turned his face sideways and looked at the messy papers on the table. Some were maps that he had drawn that were not destroyed. Some were pictures of girls that he, unconsciously drew when he was tired. He sat in silence for a while. Just as he was about to get up and tidy up the table, he sensed something and turned around. He saw the door open. Wei Bai stood outside the door, the girl's fingers resting lightly on the door. She looked at him with a hint of worry in her eyes. "Young master." Lu Xinglan was stunned, then pursed his lips and suppressed the hesitation in his heart. After all, protecting the Southern Nation and destroying the Northern Nation. The idea of returning to the border was very tempting to him. But when he saw Wei Bai, this kind of temptation faded away. If he really had to choose, he might, choose to stay. The man gently raised his eyes. His indifferent eyes cast a faint shadow like a broken light. He was about to get up when he saw the girl slowly walking over. Then, she squatted down gently and pressed the back of his hand on his leg. He could only sit. Seeing that he put his hands on his legs, the girl looked up and looked at him silently for a long time. Then, she said, "I know what you're worried about." Lu Xinglan lowered her eyes and was about to tell him not to worry. However, he saw the young girl silently staring at him. Her sparkling and charming eyes were filled with understanding. It seemed to know what he was thinking. Her fair fingers gently pinched his fingertips. "Young master." Her voice was calm and her lips curled up slightly. "Go fight at the border." Lu Xinglan pursed her lips and didn't respond. Her dark eyes were incomparably silent. There was a long silence. He finally said in a hoarse voice, "If I leave, what will you do?" When the young girl heard this, she couldn't help but smile. Her eyes were filled with amazement. Her face gently pressed against the back of his hand. She was like a child acting coquettishly. "Of course I'm waiting for you." Lu Xinglan's breathing paused. She felt her heart beating faster and faster. Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes and smiled cutely. "Young master, you're my hero. You defeated the North, protected the South, and also protected me." She was a citizen of the Southern Empire. He protected the Southern nation. He protected her. Lu Xinglan's eyelashes trembled. He stared at her face that was pressed against the back of his hand. After a long time, she heard him say in a low voice, "This is the last time." The young girl raised her eyes in confusion. Her eyes were clear and reflected his handsome face. The man's voice was light and firm. "This is the last time I protect the South." He lowered his head slightly and kissed her cheek. "Then, I will use the rest of my life to protect you." Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 92. Chapter 28:39. Before dawn, the sky was still dark. Lu Xinglan woke up early. He put on his clothes and packed his bag yesterday. The man walked lightly to the wall and took out his long sword. There was also a bow and a quiver. Although the extravagant atmosphere in the capital could make him live a more exquisite life, it could not touch his heart at all. The more extravagant and exquisite his life was, the more cautious he was. The noble of the Southern Kingdom had always been famous for being absurd and fond of pleasure. The best food, the most beautiful clothes, and the most beautiful dances all came from the noble circle of the Southern Kingdom. The royal family did not suppress this atmosphere. It was even worse. Lu Xinglan grew up in the border, which was completely different from the capital. Even though it was summer in the capital, it had already started to snow in the border. The coldness there was not something the nobles in the capital could imagine. The cruelty and suffering there. The nobles of the Southern Kingdom might not be able to experience it in their entire lives. Iron-blooded armor, cold arrows, and corpses. If he hadn't guarded the border in the Southern Kingdom, the barbarians in the Northern Kingdom who were used to suffering would have been able to crush them with absolute advantage. They would crush all the exquisite and extravagant things into powder. So the more exquisite his life was, the colder his heart was. After packing up everything, the man wore a black suit with narrow sleeves binding his wrists. He carried a bag and a bow on one shoulder, and his long sword was casually placed beside the bed. Then he carefully lifted the bed curtain. He saw Wei Wei Bai's black hair spread out on the pillow, and the fair skin on her back could be vaguely seen under the blanket. There were faint red marks of ambiguity on it. Black hair and white skin. Her sleeping posture was lazy and peaceful. If he was the emperor, he would probably be dragged away from court. Thinking of this, Lu Xinglan's expression changed. He had actually hesitated for a long time, but he still couldn't make up his mind. It was because Yuan Xian coveted his woman. He left. Even if there were trusted generals guarding the Lu family, he couldn't guard against the royal family. Lu Xinglan thought of the court. Although he had controlled his power for most of his life, once he left, who knew what would happen in the next moment when the power of the court was surging? How about? Lu Xinglan stared at Wei Wei Bai's sleeping face for a long time. Her face was pale. Even when she was aroused last night, her face was only a light pink. His body couldn't handle it. So he couldn't take her to the border. That place was too torturous. Lu Xinglan was reluctant. He was not used to the extravagant life in the capital. But he thought that if she had been here before. Of course, the more exquisite the better. The more extravagant, the better. The more comfortable, the better. Lu Xinglan thought for a long time with an expressionless face, then sighed. The military officers guarding this place were all trusted aides of the imperial court. More than half of the imperial guards were under his control as well. There shouldn't be any problems. Lu Xinglan sat until the light of dawn began to appear on the horizon. Only then did he slowly get up. The man's long and narrow eyelashes suppressed the dark light in his eyes. He reached out his fair fingertips and lightly touched her hair. Then he lowered his head and kissed her red lips. Soft and cool lips. His kiss warmed her up a little. She seemed to be disturbed. Only then did Lu Xinglan hold her breath and leave her. He didn't want to disturb her. He deliberately made her tired last night because he thought that she wouldn't have to face his farewell today. Otherwise, he would see her reluctant eyes. He would waver again. Lu Xinglan reached out and gently took the long sword by the bed. The bed curtain slowly fell, covering the girl's shadow. Then he silently turned around and walked out in the light of dawn. Slash. Chapter 2840. Lu Xinglan went out of the door and whistled. A black horse galloped over. He got on the horse and was about to gallop off. However, he saw a servant taking care of the carriage, as if someone was about to leave. A carriage of this size was required to leave the residence. There were only Mother Lu and Wei Wei Bai. Lu Xinglan looked at the carriage indifferently for a while before pulling the reins. The horse immediately started galloping. Meanwhile, Wei Wei Bai was sleeping soundly. The system finally came back after being blocked for an entire night and saw the male lead running away. He immediately turned on the super alarm. I've waited for 1,000 years, I've waited for 1,000 years, I have no regrets. The decibel exceeded that of a plane taking off in 1,000 years. Wei Wei Bai immediately jumped up. She covered herself with a blanket and looked confused. What's wrong? Who's watching a snake's marriage scam drama so early in the morning? A snake's marriage scam, such a touching love story between a human and a beast. How could it be a scam? The system silently turned off the alarm. You said that you wanted to go to the border with the male lead to increase his favorability. In the end, the male lead ran away. To go with the male lead. Wei Wei Bai prepared 2 days of pots and pans, quilts, pillows, incense burners, various skincare products and the like. The food could fill half the carriage. The carriage was already prepared and ready to leave at any time. Wei Wei Bai pulled her clothes and put them on under the blanket while yawning. Lu Xinglan, that beast, is not human. Even a beast's waist is not as good as his waist. Did he eat a tiger's penis, bastard? After a night of torment. Even beasts did not have his drive. She put on her dress, carried a small bag, put on her shoes, and ran out. When she saw her carriage, she hurriedly went up. She had no choice but to go to the border. Lu Xinglan had no intention of rebelling. If she was not by his side, he would go to war for 3 to 5 years. If he did not come back, she would be disfigured first. She had thought about it. Anyway, when she was at the border, she would think of ways to frame Yuan Xian for treason or something. As time passed, he didn't believe that Lu Xinglan wouldn't rebel for the sake of the southern nation. She finally understood. If Lu Xinglan wanted to rebel, she wouldn't be able to take the romantic route. Because the more favorable his impression of her, the more he wanted to live in seclusion and farm in the countryside. On the contrary, when the royal family was courting death, his visit index would increase. However, the increase was limited. It was probably because that brat Yuan Xian had not really provoked him. Wei Bai had already thought of a series of ways to sell out the information and how to make Lu Xinglan suffer heavy losses. It would be best if she could walk the line between life and death. This way, Lu Xinglan could see everything clearly. That bastard Yuan Xian really wanted him dead. He would not give him any chance to live in seclusion. Then, for the sake of her own life, Lu Xinglan would have no choice but to rebel. Wei Bai was thinking of all kinds of plans. Once in a while, he would chat with the system to help sort out his thoughts. After the system finished listening, it said, "Why are you no different from those evil demonesses?" She was simply an evil female supporting character, constantly thinking of inciting others to rebel. He couldn't wait for the Southern Empire to be in deep trouble. Wei Bai said, "Say that again." The system said, "Evil demoness." Wei Bai said, the last 4 words. The system said, "Evil demoness." Wei Bai immediately held her face in satisfaction. "Thank you for the compliment." It was an evil demoness, and all 9 of them were the number 1 beauties. The remaining one was a fairy. She liked this beautiful description. The system was speechless. The carriage left the city and headed north. However, it didn't take more than 2 steps. The carriage stopped. The. Chapter 2841. Wei Bai lifted the curtain of the carriage and didn't wait to ask the coachman what was going on. She saw a handsome man sitting on a black horse in front of her. He seemed to have waited for a while. His long hair was tied up in a high ponytail and fell behind him. He was wearing a black robe with narrow sleeves, which set off his slender figure even more nimble. Wei Bai looked at him silently. Lu Xinglan also looked up and stared at the girl sitting in the carriage. She held the curtain with her fingers, and her delicate face was calm and gentle. Finally, she said in a calm voice, "Young master, I'll go with you." This sentence was clearly soft. But for some reason, it gave people a special feeling of strength. Lu Xinglan's eyes were deep, and he sat on the horse without moving. Finally, he sighed, "It's very cold at the border. Your body is weak, and your hands and feet are cold in a warm place like the capital. You'll feel even worse there." The girl sitting in the carriage was stunned, as if she didn't expect him to say this. But she immediately reacted and curved her beautiful eyes. She said with a smile, "Then will young master help me warm my feet?" These words were said too calmly. Instead, there was no ambiguous feeling. It was more of a coquettish act. Lu Xinglan pursed his lips and said, "There are no flowers there." She had always liked these flowers. But there weren't any at the border. Wei Bai casually used her fingers to comb the strands of hair that had fallen by her ear. Then, she smiled sweetly. "If there are no flowers, I think you'll be fine." The man was as handsome as jade, and his face was unparalleled. He was much better looking than the flowers in the capital. Lu Xinglan reacted quickly and immediately understood what she meant. He was speechless for a moment, and a few traces of red crept up his fair cheeks. He lowered his head a little awkwardly. "You'll suffer if you go." Wei Weibai smiled. "It's not difficult to follow you." Lu Xinglan looked at her silently for a while. Suddenly, he got off the horse and picked a gorgeous wildflower from the roadside. He jumped onto the carriage. His movements were light, so as not to disturb the horse. On the contrary, Wei Weibai was shocked by his nimble and fast movements. She instinctively wanted to retreat. "I'm not leaving, Lu Xinglan. I want to follow you." Lu Xinglan, on the other hand, calmly placed the wild flower in her hair. Her pale and clean face was soft, and there was a trace of blood in it due to the beauty of the wildflowers. He smirked. "Are you going to suffer with me?" Wei Weibai said, "I'm not afraid." Lu Xinglan was silent for a moment before saying, "I'm scared." He was afraid that her body wouldn't be able to take it. As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Xinglan snatched the coachman's whip, turned the carriage around, and whipped the horse. Under Wei Weibai's astonished gaze, he jumped off the carriage. "Send Madame back to the capital and forbid her from following us." His words were in order. She wanted to follow him, but he wouldn't let her. If she wanted to suffer, he wouldn't let her. She should be the one he doted on and loved. He refused to let her suffer even a little bit. The coachman was a trusted soldier of the Lu family, so he obeyed Lu Xinglan's orders. He immediately ran in the direction of the capital. Lu Xinglan stood in the same spot as the black horse walked over and stood beside him. Wei Weibai's shocked and anxious voice sounded. "Lu Xinglan, I want to follow you." Lu Xinglan's heart softened, and the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He stood there in a daze. After a long silence, he looked up and smiled helplessly. "Looks like I have to speed up." This was the first time he wanted to abandon a safe plan and change to the most intense and fastest way. To end this hopeless battle. Just because, she's still waiting for me to go back. Chapter 2842. Lu Xinglan said softly. Then he got on the horse, and with a fierce look in his eyes, he pulled the reins and galloped away. He had to end it quickly. He had to come back quickly. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 94. Wei Weibai was sent back to the capital, and was stuffed into the Lu mansion, unable to leave. When she went out, she was followed by a line of soldiers. Those who didn't know would think that they were escorting prisoners. Favorability, 94. Rebellion Index, 0. Wei Weibai said that she couldn't be cured, she couldn't be a demoness who brought disaster to the country. She was going to be disfigured. Soon, a month had passed. There was only 1.5 months left before the side mission, she would be unrecognizable. It wasn't easy to not fail now. The communication system in ancient times was so bad. Lu Xinglan disappeared after going to the border. She couldn't even send him a message, let alone a strategy. The system was curious. What message did you send to make him rebel? Wei Weibai was expressionless. I went to mess with Yuan Xian, I made him a cuckold, he'll rebel when he's angry and kill us. System, the host is going all out for the side mission. Wei Weibai sighed, it's a pity, he can't even do it, he's afraid that I'll run away, the Lu mansion is like an impenetrable fortress. Because she was so sad, Wei Weibai decided to go shopping to relieve her mood. She bought a bunch of flowers and was about to go home. The carriage didn't stop for a long time. Wei Weibai asked, what's wrong? The carriage took a lot of detours, did the driver get lost? System, no, he just wants to give you a gift. Wei Weibai, ? System, cuckold. The carriage stopped, and the driver disappeared. Bai Weiwei lifted the curtain to take a look. She saw pavilions, terraces, and pavilions, red walls, blue tiles, and flowers. The palace, the young man standing below the carriage, wearing a yellow robe, had a delicate face, and because his eyes were bright and happy, it washed away the darkness around him. He seemed to be at a loss of what to do. When he saw the young girl looking at him in confusion, he wanted to explain, but his mouth was a little clumsy. "Jen, no, I saw that you were in a bad mood, so I wanted to have someone bring you here to relax." This reason was too perfunctory. He went to the imperial palace to relax. Wouldn't it be even more depressing? Weiwei Bai pursed her lips and didn't say anything. There was a trace of coldness in her charming eyes. Although it was cold. But it was still beautiful. Yuan Xian took a few steps forward and looked at her quietly for a long time before reaching out his hand. "Weiwei, do you like it here?" Weiwei Bai didn't say anything, but something was wrong in her eyes. She finally reacted and wanted to return to the carriage. But in the next moment, he saw Yuan Xian get into the carriage. Weiwei Bai immediately shouted in a low voice, "What are you doing?" "I am a married woman, Your Majesty." These words were cold and heavy. Yuan Xian hadn't even taken half a step into the carriage when his figure stopped. He lowered his eyes, and the joy in his eyes was replaced by indifference. Then, he snorted softly. "She won't be very soon." He paused and thought for a moment before saying, "You should say that you are a widow of the Liu family." Weiwei Bai's face paled. "Please don't say that, Your Majesty." Yuan Xian's black eyes surged with a twisted heat. He smiled. "Liu Xinglan is dead. He was ambushed by the Northern Kingdom's army and fell off a cliff. The Northern Kingdom is holding a celebration party. Although they didn't see the corpse, no one could be sure whether he was dead or not. The suspicious Yuan Xian had already sent out the best assassins to find the corpse. Or, the living Liu Xinglan. Then, they would kill him again." Weiwei Bai pursed her lips and looked at him coldly, disbelief written all over her face. Yuan Xian sneered. The malicious youth reached out and grabbed her slender wrist, wanting to pull her into his arms. "You have to believe it even if you don't want to. Liu Xinglan is dead, so," he met her cold eyes. He said fiercely and heavily. "You're mine now." The /save button at the bottom to record your reading record. Chapter 2843. It had always been a cold emperor's bedroom. It suddenly became lively. A group of palace maids was sent. The young emperor, who had always hated flowers, suddenly asked people to collect all kinds of rare flowers and plants. When he was in the Liu mansion, the young man had specially inquired about it. She liked to make her own rouge and powder. They were all made of flowers. She didn't even like those artificial jewelry, but she liked to casually pin flowers in her hair. He often thought of the scene when they met in the lotus field. The girl's jade-like face was full of smiles. Later, when he met her several times, he could see that she more or less had flowers in her hair. If it was someone else, the flowers would be overshadowed by the conspicuous flowers. Only on her body, the petals that were fleeting were merely embellishments to her stunning beauty. The young emperor was so careful, checking everything. He was afraid that it wasn't good enough and he wouldn't get a good response. A row of palace maids came over with jewelry, clothes, rouge, flowers, and all kinds of beautiful accessories. They came to a closed door. The head palace maid carefully opened the lock without making a sound. It was as if she was afraid of alarming the people in the palace. The palace was where Yuan Xian lived. It was unusually spacious, and the white gauze curtain that had just been hung was fluttering lightly. It isolated the prying eyes of the people outside. The head palace maid didn't dare to look up and put down the things. Then she said respectfully, "Miss, do you want to change clothes?" There was no response. The head palace maid was secretly nervous and looked up carefully. But she saw that there were flowers on the table beside the screen. Her plain-colored fingers landed lightly on the flowers. The young girl's face was calm. She supported her cheek with one hand. Her eyes were emotionless as she looked at the flowers on the table. The head palace maid whispered again, "Miss, please change clothes." Wei Wei Bai was too lazy to look at her. After all, she was watching the Gourd brothers fight the snake spirit that the system played for her. It was said that the Gourd brothers were finished. She could see what Su Xian, the White Lady, and Fa Hai had to say. Wei Wei Bai said, "Yes, it looks good." The head palace maid was full of cold sweat, but when she thought of the emperor's orders, she didn't dare to disobey. She stepped forward and reached out to grab Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai finally glanced at her lazily and did not stop her. He was locked up for 3 days. Actually, she was also rotten. He was also hungry. It was time for him to accept his fate. The head palace maid's fingers had just landed on the back of her hand. Suddenly, he heard a cold sneer behind him. "Who allowed you to touch her?" The chief palace maid's face turned pale, and her legs immediately went soft. She knelt down and begged for mercy. "Your Majesty, this servant knows her mistake." Yuan Xian walked in from outside. He was a young man in a black robe. His face was still an unhealthy white. His eyes were incomparably gloomy, as if everyone owed him 8 million. Men drag him away and flog him. There was no mention of the number of beatings, meaning that he would be beaten to death. Wei Wei Bai finally pulled her emotions back from the love story of the 7 brothers of the Calabash brothers. She sighed faintly, and the flower on her fingertips fell onto the table. "Don't kill her. She didn't disrespect me." A trace of pleasant surprise appeared on Yuan Xian's gloomy face. But he restrained himself. Instead, he said gloomily, "She didn't do anything good. Leaving her alive is just a waste." Wei Wei Bai sat with her eyes lowered. She slightly turned her face, and her eyes were cold. There was no trace of seduction in her charming eyes, only cold indifference. Yuan Xian's thoughts were seen through by her. Chapter 2844. He lowered his head in embarrassment and clenched his fingers. Finally, the girl said softly, "I'll bathe and change my clothes. I'll eat properly. There's no need to shout at others." Yuan Xian's expression changed, but he was still stubborn. "I punished them because they didn't do well. I'm not usually so cruel." The palace maids and eunuchs kneeling on the ground, Wei Wei Bai looked away casually and continued to look at the flowers on the table. There was a hint of sadness on her beautiful face. Then, she seemed to be testing him. "Do you have any news?" She seemed to be so desperate that she didn't know who to ask. She could only ask the executioner. Yuan Xian's eyes were filled with viciousness, but when he saw her hanging her head, a trace of mist appeared in her clear eyes. She was as fragile as a broken flower. So beautiful that it could disappear at any time. His heart trembled and he suddenly told the truth. "Who knows what happened to Lu Xinglan? I can't find him. He suddenly disappeared." Bai Guo was also affected by the contract. He didn't move again. Whether Lu Xinglan was dead or not became a common worry for Yuan Xian and Bai Guo. Wei Wei Bai was silent. The slender girl sitting quietly was so dreamy that she didn't look like a real person. Yuan Xian stared at her blankly for a while and couldn't help but take 2 steps forward. However, he saw her take out a handkerchief and gently cover her eyes. The tears that she couldn't cover in time fell from the corners of her eyes to her pink cheeks. She cried silently. It was so sad that it moved people. Yuan Xian's heart ached, but he was crazily jealous. She was crying for Lu Xinglan. Don't kill him. He's a hero. Wei Wei Bai's voice was choked with sobs. She endured and said this sentence as if she was crying blood. Yuan Xian stopped in his tracks and opened his mouth, but he didn't get angry again. These words were too heavy. They were too admiring. She liked how a person looked. Even when they were sad, they were dazzling. Yuan Xian gritted his teeth, thinking that he must find Lu Xinglan. And then kill him. Wei Wei Bai suddenly looked up. The handkerchief in her hand was soaked with tears. Her cheeks were flushed, and her long eyelashes were wet. She spoke softly, almost pleadingly. I was willing to pay any price for his safety. Only then did Yuan Xian see the unwavering suspicion in her eyes. She didn't believe that he didn't know where Lu Xinglan was. She thought that he still wanted to kill Lu Xinglan, so she lowered herself to beg. He locked her up for 3 days. But she refused to say a single word, refused to eat a single mouthful of rice, refused to pay any attention to him. Today, to get information about Lu Xinglan, he had to do it. To beg him not to harm Lu Xinglan. She was actually speaking so humbly. Yuan Xian's thin lips were tightly pursed, and the malice in his eyes was exceptionally thick. He really wanted to fling his sleeves and yell at her for not giving up on Lu Xinglan. Wouldn't it be better to be his concubine? He was the true master of this country, and Lu Xinglan was just a watchdog. Now that the dog was worthless, he had no choice but to kill it. Who dared to say anything? Even if Lu Xinglan died and his country was temporarily unstable, he felt that he had the ability to protect it. He didn't believe that Lu Xinglan wasn't there. Could those wolf cubs of the Northern Kingdom really swallow up the entire Southern Kingdom? As long as they didn't swallow it all. He still had the ability to make a comeback. He had lived in Lu Xinglan's shadow since he was young. Now, even the girl he liked belonged to Lu Xinglan. The pride of an emperor made him clench his fists tightly, and the killing intent in his eyes boiled. He opened his mouth a few times. However, he saw that the girl seemed to be a little tired with her eyes half closed. She hadn't had a good rest during this period of time, and the shadow under her eyes was exceptionally obvious. / Fast, comma. Chapter 28:45. Her health wasn't good. And the main culprit for her poor health was that he gave the secret medicine to Mother Lu and poisoned her. She supported her face with her fingers. Half of her pink wrist peeked out from her sleeve. It was delicate and flawless. She was a delicate beauty. Her black hair was a little messy, and the flowers on the ground seemed to have bloomed under her feet. She was so beautiful that Yuan Xian was stunned for a moment. She pursed her lips. Her lips were a little dry. Her face was also unusually pale. She looked like she would collapse at any moment. Yuan Xian paused for a long time. There was a hint of struggle in his eyes. Suddenly, he took 2 steps forward. Are you willing to do anything? His voice was low and dangerous. Wei Wei Bai's long eyelashes fluttered, and then she looked at him with cold and empty eyes. She didn't answer. Yuan Xian looked away first. Okay, isn't it just Lu Xinglan? She's worth your life. I won't kill her, okay? Even if he took back the assassin. There was still the pursuit of the North. This time, he cooperated with the North to take Lu Xinglan's life. Both sides had reached an agreement. For the people of the North, their country could only be safe without Lu Xinglan. For Yuan Xian, he could only grow and become a real emperor without Lu Xinglan. He could even get the girl he liked. Wei Wei Bai's cold eyes were replaced by a kind of joy. She revealed a smile. Her cold and frail appearance had a hint of smoke and fire, and the corners of her charming eyes curved slightly. Seductive. Yuan Xian was stunned. He suddenly felt that a promise not to kill Lu Xinglan in exchange for a smile was worth it. A crazy thought even appeared. Didn't Yuan like Lu Xinglan? He liked her so much that he built a huge and gorgeous cage under his residence. He was waiting to catch Lu Xinglan and imprison her. He had never liked that crazy sister of his. But he felt that he could understand her desperate and terrifying thoughts. Just like him now. He wanted Lu Xinglan alive and threw her to Yuan to watch over. Then, he could use Lu Xinglan's life to threaten her to smile at him. Yuan Xian's inferiority complex and twisted madness slowly overflowed. He couldn't. She would not like a eunuch. If there wasn't anything that could threaten her, how could she be willing to stay? Yuan Xian pursed his lips and walked up to Wei Wei Bai. He reached out and stroked her hair. Wei Wei Bai seemed to want to dodge. Yuan Xian said coldly, "I won't kill Lu Xinglan." She was stunned and did not move. She sat there obediently and allowed him to stroke her hair. Yuan Xian immediately revealed a good-looking smile. It was so useful. Lu Xinglan still had this kind of value. When they caught him, they would think of a way to secretly transport him back to Nangong and break his limbs. Be his tool of threat. Wei Wei Bai's hair was stroked by someone. She said to the system calmly, "That's all you've got." Yuan Xian admitted that he was a brutal little lion cub. In Wei Wei Bai's eyes, she was simply a silly little husky. The system said, "Don't tease him, don't tease him, don't tease him." The little emperor couldn't resist the host's tricks at all. The host hasn't gone overboard yet. The little emperor couldn't take it anymore. Wei Wei Bai said, "What did I do? Did I expose my thighs or my arms, or did I seduce him?" "You didn't have to do anything." Yuan Xian the little brat got carried away by himself. Can you blame him for not seeing a beauty? Blame yourself for being too beautiful. You haven't done anything yet, and he couldn't resist being seduced. The system indicated that the host was still in a narcissistic state today. Chapter 2846. Wei Wei Bai, and it's not a show for the little rabbit, but for the bastard. Lu Xinglan had planted a bunch of spies around Yuan Xian. She didn't show anything. Lu Xinglan could see it. After all, if she wanted to take a side mission, she had to do it miserably. Otherwise, how could he let Lu Xinglan see his woman under another man's body? That tragic feeling. Once she was in trouble, he had to come and save her. She rebelled while he was saving her. Wei Wei Bai smiled calmly and then sighed. "I finally have a reason to take a bath." She pretended to be loyal and aggrieved. Was it easy to not eat, drink, rest, or wash up? If the bastard didn't rebel, she would take a pair of scissors and cut him off before she failed her mission. It wasn't a man's toy. It was cold at the border. It was already the end of summer in the capital. It was when it started to snow at the border. Xian Wu grabbed the wooden tube on the pigeon and opened it to take out a message. He walked into a dilapidated thatched house. Lu Xinglan was lying quietly on the bed. His chest was wrapped in a thick bandage, and blood was still seeping out from the bandage. His bloodless face was unusually pale, and his eyelashes were drooping, creating a fragile shadow under his eyes. Xian Wu came in expressionlessly, but hesitated whether he should hand out the message. Suddenly, the man on the bed's eyelashes trembled, and then Wu saw him open his dark and deep eyes. His voice was hoarse. "Give it to me." Wu handed the note to him. Lu Xinglan reached out and took it. The note was very thin and made of a special material. It could write a lot of messages. The last item on the note. It was Wei Wei Bai's message. She was captured and sent to the palace. He first learned of this news not long after he was shot. Because his life was at stake. Wu told him the news coldly. If he died, then Wei Wei Bai would belong to someone else forever. This news stimulated him. Lu Xinglan touched the note with his fingertips and hesitated for a while before reading it slowly. There was a long silence. Lu Xinglan struggled to close her palm and crushed the note into powder. He pursed his thin lips, and his thin face gave off an incomparably sharp and handsome aura. An extremely thick sense of coldness appeared in his pair of deep black eyes. He looked up, his face deathly pale and mournful. She said he was a hero. That was why she had to use everything she had to exchange for his safety. She had been tormented by not eating or drinking for 3 days in the palace. She was almost ready to die. But because she wanted to save him, even if it was just an illusory promise, she was willing to give up everything in exchange. Lu Xinglan coughed lightly. He coughed up a mouthful of blood. Wu immediately came over and smoothed his back, wiping away the bloodstains. Lu Xinglan didn't move. Instead, she lowered her eyes and sneered. She gritted her teeth and said with hatred, "Yuan Xian." He had never hated the royal family. No matter how preposterous it was or how much of an eyesore it was. He still felt that it was his duty to protect the Southern Empire. He couldn't stand the actions of the imperial family, so he interfered. He didn't really hate her either. But this was the first time a violent rage had surged in his heart. This hatred was surging and couldn't be stopped. It destroyed the last trace of loyalty he had to the royal family. Lu Xinglan lowered his head. His eyes were cold and deep. After a long silence, he finally said softly, "She said I was a hero." Wu nodded. "She worships you." This wasn't a secret. The corners of Lu Xinglan's mouth twitched, but he couldn't smile. Finally, he said in a hoarse voice, "I used to be the hero of the Southern Empire, but from now on, will be her hero alone." At this point, Wu heard Lu Xinglan say calmly, "It's the opposite. She could sacrifice everything to save him. Wasn't he the same? He could betray everyone for her. He was no longer willing to protect everyone. He only wanted to be her hero." Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 96. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. You can see it when you open the bookshelf next time. If you like. Chapter 2847. Yuan Xian looked at the pile of rouge in distress. He specially asked an old master to make this. They were all packed in beautiful porcelain boxes. He felt that the boxes were too ordinary and even asked someone to pack them in a gold box. When he opened it, he saw countless boxes of rouge. She liked rouge. So he asked someone to make it. He didn't want her to make it herself and tire her hands. The killers on Lu Xinglan's side all returned, but they couldn't find Lu Xinglan. Perhaps Lu Xinglan was really dead. Yuan Xian had a conflicted and complicated feeling in his heart. It was best that she was dead. But what would she do after she died? During this period of time, Yuan Xian finally saw it clearly. Wei Wei Bai liked Lu Xinglan. She liked her very, very much, so she couldn't eat anymore and started to get sick. She took medicine and spat it out. His heart ached when he saw it. Yuan Xian stared blankly at the table full of flowers and rouge, thinking about what else girls liked. He couldn't be bothered to look at those concubines. To know what girls liked, he even went to the harem. In the end, those concubines all used a bunch of tricks to make him stay. One was too out of line and found something wrong with him. He directly chased her to the cold palace. The eunuchs and palace maids would naturally deal with this kind of concubine who knew the secret. The imperial physician rushed over and reported every time as usual. Yuan Xian heard and frowned. "Can't you let her eat more?" The imperial physician said, "Mental illness is difficult to treat." Yuan Xian nodded and then asked someone to remove the imperial physician from his position and chase him out of the palace. Useless imperial physician, scram. After the imperial physician, it was Yuanda's turn. She was dressed exceptionally gorgeously and smiled eccentrically. "Imperial brother, congratulations on getting what you wanted." Yuan Xian looked at her coldly and didn't say anything. Yuanda sat down in the main hall and said in a sharp voice, "You got what you wanted. Where's my Xinglan?" Yuan Xian rolled his eyes and said coldly, "She got into an accident and I can't find her." Yuanda roared loudly. "I know you want to kill her. We agreed to split one. Why do you get one and I don't?" Yuan Xian sneered. "What? Lu Xinglan is missing and I can't find her." Yuanda staggered to his feet and cried, "Why don't you chase after him? What if the people of the Northern Kingdom find him and want his life?" Yuan Xian looked at her silently, looking at her crazy and ugliness. Suddenly, he said, "You're too." Yuanda retorted coldly, "You're more pitiful than me." The brother and sister glared at each other coldly. The system and Bai Weiwei watched them stare at each other, bored. The system was munching on its snacks. "The little emperor can't be cuckolded. That illness is very serious." It was no wonder that he would drug Lu Xinglan with such a misogynistic drug. Because Lu's eyes. He had a deep understanding of this aspect. Bai Weiwei said weakly, "Hungry." Then it silently picked up the bird's nest and red date porridge. "Calm. Lulu." Yes, the woman had been snatched away. The visitor index was only 60. In other words, although that old tortoise Sun Tzu Lu would verbally say that he was rebelling, but in his heart, he did not care about the throne. In the end, Gao Bui succeeded in his rebellion, but he still left the throne to someone else. Wei Wei Bai was half lying on the bed, reading a book of pretentious ancient Chinese. She muttered, 60 is too low. How can I make him want to be the emperor? This was a difficult problem. It was not a problem for other men. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here // to make it easier for you to read it next time. You can click on to record this reading record. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here, comma. Chapter 2848. It was too difficult for Lu Boyan. He was more of a eunuch than a eunuch. He had no passion at all. He only thought about living in seclusion in the countryside every day. He had no ambition at all. The rebellion index could reflect the mentality of the target. The system said, if you torture yourself like this, you'll only make him rebel. Wei Wei Bai pondered in silence. Rebel was rebel, but it did not say that he wanted to be emperor. The index of 60 meant that. She thought for a long time before saying faintly, it seems that this green hat is not worn deep enough. Self-torture made Lu Xinglan feel pity for him. However, this kind of pity and pain was not enough to make Lu Xinglan have the impulse to be emperor. Sure enough, Lu Boyan was Lu Boyan. For a turtle to suddenly open its shell, it would need some onion, ginger, and garlic. Then, it would be easy to take out the shell after it was cooked. Wei Wei Bai sighed, I'm hungry. Thinking of Lu Xinglan made him want to eat. The white curtain fluttered. A young man stepped in from the outside. His footsteps seemed to be hesitant. However, he saw the girl on the bed looking at him. He blushed and immediately stuttered, Are you feeling better? Wei Wei Bai's face was unusually pale. Her fingertips were on the book, but she did not make a sound. Yuan Xian glanced at the book in her hand. His face darkened. Lu Xinglan liked the kind of ancient books with maps. She also liked. No. Yuan Xian's mouth was full of bitterness. She liked Lu Xinglan. He clenched his fingers and saw her sitting on the bed weakly like a lonely soul. The vitality on her face was gone. Her overly white face was a little thin. There were traces of weak tears in her eyes. She glanced at him lightly. That misty charm had a kind of irresistible charm. He took a deep breath and stared at her for a long time. Suddenly, he said, I asked the kitchen to make some soup for you. Drink some. Her stomach was cold, and her body was weak. She could not eat anything else. She just ate some liquid food. Wei Wei Bai looked at him silently. Her lips were pale, her face was beautiful, and her face was like the dawn of spring. The little emperor once again felt an indescribable feeling. Lu Xinglan isn't dead. I didn't order anyone to kill her. He had just received a message. It was said that someone saw Lu Xinglan at the border, but they lost track of her before they could see her clearly. He didn't know if he was a real person. The little emperor was sure that this information was probably true. He had already sent people to capture Lu Xinglan. Wei Wei Bai's dark eyes brightened. She touched the book, lowered her eyes, and hesitated for a moment before saying in a low voice, Thank you, Your Majesty, for informing me. She paused. A thin layer of pink appeared on his pale face for no reason. What do you want me to do? This was a trade. He gave her information about Lu Xinglan but spared her life. She traded herself for it. When the system heard this, it felt as if a green light was echoing in its ears. After crossing the mountain peak and layers of white clouds in front of him, there was the green light. Male lead, come and listen. The little emperor was also stunned. Just now, he just wanted her to not be so worried. But he didn't think of asking her to do anything. What could he make her do? Smile at him. Yuan Xian pursed his lips. He saw the fragile hesitation in her eyes and the involuntary trembling of her fingers. Was she afraid that he would make some unreasonable request? Yuan Xian had always been cold and cruel. He had no moral bottom line. But for the first time, he didn't dare to be too presumptuous with her. He carefully came to the bedside and couldn't help but reach out to touch her face. But he saw that she didn't avoid it. Instead, she sat there with her eyelashes half closed and pursed lips. Slash. Chapter 2849. It was as if touching her was the price she had to pay after a deal was made. Yuan Xian was speechless for a moment. His finger stopped in the air for a while before he slowly retracted it. Bai Weiwei slowly lifted her eyes and looked at him, puzzled. Yuan Xian was about to get angry. She treated him as if he was a scourge. Whenever he touched her, she would show a pained expression. But when he saw her looking at him indifferently, he couldn't bear to get angry. He said softly, Eat something. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a while before asking, Is this a deal? Yuan Xian said in a low voice, No, I just want you to eat. Wei Bai turned her face away and said softly, "I'm not hungry." Yuan Xian laughed at himself. She must be too disgusted to eat when she saw him. He was about to leave, not wanting to make her feel worse. But he heard the girl behind him say softly, "It's good to drink some soup." Yuan Xian stopped in his tracks and immediately walked out quickly. He shouted at the eunuch closest to him, "What are you waiting for?" "The girl wants to drink soup." The eunuch immediately ran out and ordered the kitchen. Yuan Xian stood at the door and couldn't help but smile. She wanted to eat. It wasn't a deal. It was just that she wanted to drink soup. With this little interaction, Yuan Xian felt that he would definitely make her like him willingly in the future. The soup was served quickly. Yuan Xian personally carried the soup and sat by the bed. He was a little clumsy with his words, "Come, drink some." Wei Bai's face was cold and pale. She looked at him quietly for a while before reaching out to take the spoon. In the end, her fingers were weak and the spoon fell back into the bowl. Yuan Xian couldn't bear to say, "I'll feed you." During this period of time, she had tortured herself to the point of almost losing her life. She didn't even have the strength to eat. Wei Bai stared at him silently for a long time. She didn't agree or reject him. Yuan Xian carefully brought the spoon to her lips. In fact, he knew that in the next moment, she might turn her face away and refuse to eat. Just as he was feeling uneasy. Wei Bai, on the other hand, lowered her eyes slightly, opened her mouth, touched the edge of the spoon, and drank a little of the soup. Yuan Xian widened his eyes and stared at her blankly. Wei Bai finished drinking. He immediately ladled her more soup, and she drank it again. Yuan Xian's mind went blank. He only had one thought. She drank the soup. She even drank from him. The eunuch standing at the door lowered his head and waited until everything was fine. The eunuch walked to a secluded place, took out a small wooden tube, and passed the message to a passing palace maid. The palace maid walked to the other side of the palace and handed it to a young eunuch who raised the pigeons. Very soon, the news spread. Lu Xinglan was currently sharpening his sword. His cold and emotionless face, in front of the fire, was imprinted with the multicolored light of the flames, handsome to the point of being heartless. Xan Wu read the message, and when he reached the end, he paused. He saw Lu Xinglan's extremely calm face. He continued, "Madam drank the soup. Yuan Xian fed her personally." Lu Xinglan stopped sharpening her sword, but didn't say anything. Xan Wu threw the message into the fire. Silence spread between the two of them. They sat in the tent. Outside were the generals of the border. This place was Lu Xinglan's world. Previously, he was plotted against by the people of the Northern Kingdom and was shot by an arrow, causing him to almost be killed by the killers sent by Yuan Xian. Now, he had recovered and returned to the border camp. No one in the imperial court knew that he had returned here. Because all the information at the border had been tampered with, filtered, and sent to the imperial court. Chapter 2850. The royal family still thought that he was still missing. They even thought that there was nothing wrong with the border military camp. The truth was that the command of the border army had long returned to Lu Xinglan's hands. Finally, Lu Xinglan moved. He continued to lower his head and sharpen his sword. The sword light whizzed, and his eyes were cold. The fireworks of the fire illuminated half of his face, bringing out a cold and dark shadow. But Wei Bai heard it. Rebellion Index, 65. Wei Bai drank the soup and said with narrowed eyes, "Looks like it's not green enough." The system's ears seemed to ring a beautiful song, "Beautiful grassland, my home is blowing the wind, green grass is everywhere. Give it to the male lead, play it 10,000 times. If self-abuse was not enough, cuckold would make up for it. So Wei Wei Bai decided to make Lu Xinglan's cuckold more comfortable. After drinking the soup, she leaned against the window and looked at the sunlight outside. Suddenly, a young man wearing a tiger mask appeared by the window. He leaned against the window and said in a low voice, "Where did this little girl come from? She's so cute. Why don't I, the Tiger King, take her and make her my wife?" Wei Wei Bai looked at him indifferently. She was not frightened. She was not amused. This made Yuan Xian's face, which was hidden behind the mask, break out in a hot sweat. His face was red and he was about to leave. But he heard the girl say, "The weather today is good." Yuan Xian immediately said, "Yes, yes, yes." He was so anxious that he could not speak. Wei Wei Bai reached out to stroke her long hair and said softly, "Can I go out for a walk?" Yuan Xian was stunned and immediately nodded. During this time, he tried all ways to get close to her. She did not smile much. She was indifferent, cold and fragile. But Yuan Xian was not tired of it. Only the feelings that deepened day by day. It seemed that as long as she was here, even if she was unhappy, he was satisfied. Once she gave him a little feedback, he felt that the world was bright all day. Wei Wei Bai was about to get up, but she thought of something and sat sideways. In front of her was a dressing table. There were all kinds of beautiful boxes, all kinds of rouge, all kinds of jewelry, hairpins, and bright flowers. She glanced sideways at the youth outside the window. The young man was wearing a mask, so no one could see his expression, but they could feel his nervousness. She silently picked up the lipstick and gently touched her pink lips. Her bright red lips were as beautiful as fire. Her eyes were like silk, and just the light makeup on her face made her unbelievably beautiful. Finally, she picked up the flowers and gently tucked them into her hair bun. Then, she gracefully stood up and walked out. The young emperor wore a mask and followed behind her. Like a new tour guide, he stuttered excitedly. "The flowers in the imperial garden are very beautiful. I'll take you to see them. Also, there's a lake outside my bedroom. We can take a boat there." Suddenly, the young man's foot knocked against the stone steps. He staggered a few steps and almost fell on his butt. He struggled to stabilize his body. Just as he was about to get angry, he looked up and saw the girl glancing at him. She seemed to be amused by his pathetic clown appearance. A faint smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She lowered her head and covered the corners of her lips with a handkerchief. There was a faint light in her eyes, and the flowers on her temples trembled and bloomed beautifully. The young man looked at her silently. He only felt his heart beating like a drum. Lu Xinglan, who was drawing, received the message. He glanced at it and burned it. Then, he lowered his head and continued to draw. Wu packed up the maps of the capital city. This was Lu Xinglan's habit. Before she conquered a place, she had to prepare the topographic map of that place. Wu thought that today's message was not important. The messages from the past few days had made Lu Xinglan in a very bad mood. It was a good thing that Madame had started to eat. Yuan Xian made Madame laugh. It was even better that Madame did not laugh. Madame's health improved. She sat by the window and basked in the sun. Yuan Xian peeped. Yuan Xian, that bastard, was courting death. In the message, the girl's condition was slowly improving. Wu thought that Lu Xinglan would be happy. Unfortunately, Lu Xinglan's expression became uglier and uglier each time. He was puzzled. But he heard Lu Xinglan muttering to herself coldly, "Her life has been invaded by another man. Another man had been accompanying her. Even if she was unwilling, her life was slowly being invaded by that person." Lu Xinglan continued to draw. Suddenly, the paper under her pen cracked. He looked at the paper coldly, and the viciousness and fear in his eyes seeped out bit by bit. She smiled at him. Rebellion Index, 70. / Chapter 2851. The little emperor was in a good mood recently. After he made Wei Wei Bai laugh, he often brought all kinds of small things for her to play with. Together, they played cricket, dice, and paper cutting. In any case, they were all very cheap things that could pass the time. Wei Wei Bai played with them expressionlessly. She had nothing to do anyway. Although these things were like child's play. But they were fun. So all the messages Lu Xinglan received were: the girl played cricket with Yuan Xian. Lu Xinglan, the girl played paper cutting with Yuan Xian. Lu Xinglan, the girl played chess with Yuan Xian. Yuan Xian kissed the girl, but did not succeed. Lu Xinglan, the girl and Yuan Xian, Lu Xinglan crushed the paper. His face was gloomy and his eyes were extremely cold. Then he said, "Army, is the food ready? Why are you taking so long to rebel? Don't you have enough to eat?" Xan Wu, that was how slow a rebellion was. Could it be that they were rebelling today? Tomorrow, they would charge into the palace. They had a premeditated plan, an organization, a general, and an inside man. They were not a group of people. Although he thought so, he could not say so. Xan Wu, we leave in 3 days. Lu Xinglan looked at his sword in silence. After a while, he continued to sharpen the sword. If he did not sharpen the sword, he could not control his murderous heart. Where did Yuan Xian get the guts to kiss her? Even if he failed, it would not do. Wei Wei Bai's rebellion index soared again when she heard it. 75. She continued to play cricket with an expressionless face. Yes, it was fun. After playing cricket, Wei Wei Bai went to make rouge. After all, crickets were fun, but she could not play with them too much. She was a peerless beauty, her hobbies should be more elegant. How could she be like a child every day, thinking about crickets and gamoku? The system is making rouge very elegant. Bai Weiwei's expression was calm as she carefully ground the petals of her lipstick. She leaned against the window, a beautiful peony in her beautiful hair, blooming exceptionally brightly. The little emperor secretly stood outside the window and watched obsessively. She occasionally glanced at him, but as if she didn't notice him, she continued to grind her rouge. One was sitting on the other side of the rockery. One of them had her head down, her 10 slender fingers pinching a flower, incomparably indifferent. The system said, if the little cannon fodder had a favorability notification, it would be around 10,000. He had never seen such an immature cannon fodder. They hadn't even held hands, and he had already turned into the ultimate bootlicker. Wei Wei Bai said, it can't be helped. He can't do it. If he could, he would have pounced on me long ago. The system immediately panicked. He's been actively looking for medicine to treat himself recently. What if he suddenly fails? By some unique medicine to make him fail completely. Wei Wei Bai's face was calm. It doesn't matter whether he can or not. It'll be even better if he really pounces on me. If that wretch doesn't rebel, I'll pretend to swallow a cricket alive. To make tortoise, no, male lead Lu rebel. Host, you're really worried sick. He was afraid that the color of the green hat was not deep enough. He really wanted to help the little emperor a little. The little emperor secretly looked at Wei Wei Bai for a while. Only then did he carefully walk out, pretending that he had just arrived. Wei Wei Bai looked up. Her eyes were indifferent, and there was no trace of a smile. But to the little emperor, this expression was already very good. After all, in the beginning, when she entered the palace, she was almost ready to die. Now, he had the confidence to grind with her until they were old, and she didn't like it anymore. It was also for a lifetime. Chapter 2852. Yuan Xian couldn't help but smile, a trace of happiness appearing in his eyes. All these years, he felt that this was the happiest time of his life. Wei Wei Bai looked at him indifferently for a while, then gently looked away. Her fingers were stained with some lipstick, and the light powder on her fingertips looked exceptionally beautiful. Yuan Xian had nothing to say, so he tried to find a topic to talk about. He stared at those women's things. It's very pretty, Wei Wei made it really well. Wei Wei Bai looked at him indifferently, then put the lipstick in a box. Her careful look made him feel uncomfortable. This made him a little uncomfortable. She rarely pretended to be herself in front of him. But she made so much rouge. The rouge was made for Lu Xinglan, right? Women would only dress up so happily in front of the person they liked. Women dressed up for the person they liked. He didn't have the right to make her dress up for him. Yuan Xian silently swallowed his bitterness and immediately revealed a smile. Wei Wei, let's go to the Imperial Garden. Before he could finish, a eunuch scrambled over and said in a panic, Your Majesty, it's chaotic, all the ministers are asking to see you. Yuan Xian turned around, and the gloominess on his face reappeared. He suppressed his anger and said coldly, The lady is here, what are you shouting for? What if you disturb her? He didn't give Wei Wei Bai a position. Because it wasn't that time yet, she was so repulsed by him now. If he gave her a position, he was afraid of forcing her to death. In the future, when she was willing, he would give her the most honorable thing a woman could have. This kind of wish was hidden in his heart. The young emperor didn't say it out loud. But everyone in the palace knew that they couldn't slight the lady in the emperor's chamber. Whoever dared to disrespect her would incur the wrath of the emperor. The eunuch's face immediately turned pale with fright, and he knelt down and trembled. Your Majesty, General Lu has rebelled, the border army has already taken 3 cities in a row, and no one can stop them. 3 cities in a row. Yuan Xian's face turned pale, and he immediately looked up at Wei Wei Bai. However, he saw that she had already raised her head, and a trace of shock appeared in her indifferent eyes. He pursed his lips and immediately kicked the eunuch away. Deceiving the public with your lies, scram. After saying that, he immediately said to Wei Wei Bai calmly, It's just some rumors. Lu Xinglan is still missing. How could she rebel all of a sudden? A trace of doubt appeared on Wei Wei Bai's face as she stared at him quietly. Seeing this, Yuan Xian felt a little guilty. However, she only turned her face to the side and nodded indifferently. Then, she continued to make the rouge. He seemed to believe him. Yuan Xian heaved a sigh of relief and said, I'll go take a look and reprimand those old officials who only know how to deceive the public with lies. Remember to eat more for dinner. When I come back, we'll go to the roof and watch the moon. In front of Wei Wei Bai, he would always unconsciously forget to use such a distant form of address. Instead, he wanted to use me to close the distance between them. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything. Instead, she slowly wiped her hands with a handkerchief. Yuan Xian turned around and left. When he stepped out of the door, however, he heard the girl behind him say softly, Okay. Yuan Xian almost tripped over the threshold. As if in disbelief, he immediately turned around. Okay. What does that mean? Watch the moon. It's better to eat more. No matter what, it's good. Yuan Xian's gloomy mood was immediately swept away by ecstasy. He couldn't suppress the joy in his heart and immediately smiled happily. Wait for me to come back. I'll solve it soon. After saying that, Yuan Xian hurriedly ran away. Slash. Chapter 2853. When those old officials saw the young emperor coming, they thought he was going to lose his temper again. However, Yuan Xian was very calm. Tell me the situation. Lu Xinglan's army had won one after another. Some local officials even surrendered directly. Many border generals were Lu Xinglan's supporters. Lu Xinglan didn't need to put in much effort and directly knelt down to acknowledge her as their master. It was said that many traitorous officials were starting to wear dragon robes. Everyone knew that Lu Xinglan had rebelled. This country was probably going to change owners. The Lu family's reputation in the southern nation was too great, and the royal family owed the Lu family too much. As a result, the people heard that General Lu had rebelled. Instead of being shocked, they were happy. They all felt that the royal family deserved it and did a lot of bad things. Many people felt that if it weren't for Lu Xinglan, the southern nation would have been finished long ago. If Lu Xinglan was the emperor, not many people would object. This was also the bad karma of the royal family's absurd extravagance and corruption over the years, which had ruined the people's voices. The situation was not optimistic. Lu Xinglan was unstoppable. If she rushed all the way, she would be able to rush to the gates of the capital in less than half a month. Even if they closed the gates and guarded, with the tall and strong city walls, they could only hold on for 2 months. Because in 2 months, the granary in the capital would be empty. At that time, even if they didn't surrender, the people would rebel. Not to mention, who knew how many of the court officials had rebellious thoughts in their hearts. They were all on Lu Xinglan's side. Yuan Xian was extremely calm as he listened to the officials' worried arguments. The youth who had always been irritable and ruthless seemed to have grown up overnight. They were about to start cursing at each other in the court. The absurd emperor who had always been a bystander finally waved his sleeve coldly and told these people to stop arguing. Then, he coldly began to plan a counterattack. It wasn't that the royal family didn't have an army. Especially when Lu Xinglan's power was strong, how could they not be vigilant? All these years, Lu Xinglan had infiltrated the court. The royal family also wanted to infiltrate Lu Xinglan's camp, although most of them failed. However, they still obtained a lot of useful information. Yuan Xian knew how many of Lu Xinglan's people there were in the court. But he could drag all those who were confirmed out and kill them. This was his method. Normally, this was the behavior of a tyrant. But now, he could intimidate the court and stabilize the situation. In troubled times, violent means were sometimes the only way to suppress a chaotic situation. Soon, a group of officials were killed outside the imperial court. All the quarrels in the imperial court stopped. None of them dared to speak. Only then did Yuan Xian leisurely begin to issue his orders, letting his trusted aides lead the imperial guard and the local army that he had been nurturing over the years. They gathered together to fight against Lu Xinglan. They had to stop Lu Xinglan from entering the capital. Yuan Xian thought about it calmly. As long as he delayed Lu Xinglan, it was not impossible for him to counterattack. Lu Xinglan's strategy was fast. The northern barbarians didn't even have time to react. Once he was able to hold Lu Xinglan back, he would be able to do so. Seeing this opportunity, the north immediately gathered its troops and attacked Lu Xinglan's rear. It would definitely cause Lu Xinglan great losses. The sinister young man coldly planned. He was too scheming, and all kinds of schemes could not be put on the table. In comparison, Lu Xinglan was more righteous. She was even righteous toward the people of the Southern Empire. But this justice could be used to bring down Lu Xinglan. Because the northern barbarians had attacked. Even if the people were plunged into misery and suffering. Should Lu Xinglan save them? If he didn't, he wouldn't be able to hold his ground if he captured the capital. At https://www.sashu.com/ to read the full article at https://www.sashu.com to read the full article at https://sashu.com/ to make it easier for you to read it next time. You can click on .you're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.